Hey guys, it's the fucking holiday season, and we're recording a commentary on Eyes Wide Shut. Me and my friend Tomo, the best Christmas
Hey,
movie ever, Kubrick's Gift, Under the Tree.
bringing the warmth of Christmas cheer to all around the
Yeah,
world.
or the cold existential dread right into your heart. Um, yeah, you can listen to this as like a kind of a audio podcast, or you can listen to it alongside the movie. Our copy starts with the Warner Brothers logo, and that's where we're going to start. So we're going to do a countdown, and then you can watch alongside us if you'd like. All right, three,
Okay,
2, 1, go.
let's go. Let's do this.
Let's go.
Straight
This
into the void.
fucking movie. This fucking movie, man.
So I have to ask you straight up. I have to ask. When I was doing kind of research for this film, or I guess this was the impetus for asking you to do this in the first place, is
Uh huh.
your letterbox reviews of this film paint an experience of extreme distress, and I feel almost guilty asking you to do this, and from the basis of your review alone, from what I'm about to put you through. But I guess yeah, I just have to know what your experiences with this film are like when you first saw it, and how it has burrowed so, like, it's just fermented so horrifically in your mind. I have to know, basically.
I saw this when I was like 10 years old. Because
Wow.
my parents, like my dad, was like, "You got to watch these Stanley Kubrick movies," and showed me 2001. He showed me Clockwork Orange, Full Metal Jacket, and
Mm.
this. And my mom definitely did not know. So it was. Can you imagine a more awkward experience? It's like, me and my pops just sitting at home watching Eyes Wide Shut in the middle of the night, because we would always watch movies after dark on the
Mm.
weekends. And yeah, it was just like, uh, like I didn't really understand it at that time, but it did like come across to me as a horror movie. And
Mm.
now, I mean, I don't know. To me, this is one of the great, like, just cursed movies of all time. Not because like the
Yeah.
production was cursed, although in some ways it was, but
Mm.
in as much as this movie just fucks me up. It creeps me out, but in like an addictive way. Like I keep watching because I
Yeah.
love it, and it's fun. I don't know. Maybe fun's a bad word to describe. It's interesting, and it's never like
Yeah.
not compelling at any point. And
Yeah.
it's Kubrick, so it's just like a tour de force, and it's my favorite movie of his currently. And
Mm.
I just like there's something inexplicably alluring and destructive and evil, but also hypnotizing about it. And I
Mm.
just again, it's kind of the way that people they watch slasher movies despite the violence, and there's something fascinating about it. And this is my equivalent of that, is just watching Tom Cruise fumble his way around a fake New York City. That's my addiction. It's my curse.
Yeah.
So yeah, I okay. So we haven't even talked about the beginning here, but like just
Sure.
like the marketing behind this movie, and just beginning with like, all right, you came to see naked Nicole Kidman, here you go. Like, you know what I mean? Like the
Yeah.
first couple
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
seconds, Kubrick is just like being a fucker, and just
He's just like, get
he's
it
like,
out of
all
the
right,
way, get it done.
yeah, here you go. All right, now we can go on and do what we really need to do, because this movie was basically
Yeah.
like marketed as a porno between Kidman and Cruise. It's incredibly bizarre. It
Yeah.
would never happen today. It would never ever happen.
What's weird is I am old enough to remember the TV spots actually being on TV for this film. I was only about 8 years old when this film came out, but obviously, when you're 8 years old, you watch a lot of TV. I can very distinctly remember, and it's weird to think like to have actually been alive for the release of a Kubrick film, because I only think of them in terms of this legacy kind of filmmaker, this sort of history of a guy who made these classic, untouchable classic films in a league of their own. But I can remember there was like these. I was old enough to know that Tom Cruise and Nicole Kidman were together, and that was a big deal and something that got talked about quite a lot. But I can remember the spots being, incredibly salacious and trying to elicit this allure of it's going to be very kinky, it's going to be hot, and then I think that may have been the very first time I heard the name Stanley Kubrick through that. So yeah, I mean the marketing, it was all there from the beginning. They wanted to sell this kind of like incredibly steamy thriller. even though I was 8 years old and I had no real concept of sex beyond like really bad James Bond films. It was kind of all there, like you got what that film was supposed to be about, but I didn't see it till much later. So, but that impression always stuck in my mind.
Yeah, I mean, this is really the apogee, the apex of the 90s sex thriller, right?
Mm,
That kind of started in the late 70s, early 80s, and then it seemed like every other movie in the 90s was always about like this hot woman and this dumb guy being led around by his cock. It's the it's the fatal attractions and the body heats and the
mm,
basic instincts and
eight and a
the
half
last
weeks. Yeah.
seductions. Yeah, like you just have so many of these, and it seems like this is Kubrick's riff on like hot movie stars fucking and being crazy, and it's
Mm,
just so much more sinister than any of those
yeah.
movies ever will be. And it's like I would say like an authentically I don't it's like the movie equivalent of an SCP or something, like a just a
Mm,
like an object that cannot be approached, like the Lovecraftian color out of space. It's just
yeah.
inexplicable and like an object of intrigue, but like there's just you arrive at this with a lack of understanding, and I feel this is like Kubrick's total mastery of what people poured into so many of his movies, right? With like, the symbolism behind 2001, like what Clockwork Orange was saying, like
Mm,
what was he doing in The Shining, right? These throughout his career, he has this almost interpretive apparatus that's built
mm,
into the text of his films, right? Like there's a
mm,
whole documentary about that The Shining was really about the genocide of native peoples in the United States, and
yeah.
people have made this case authentically. It's about the moon landing that he faked and all this shit. And Eyes Wide Shut sees him being like, all right, well now I'm going to take that quote unquote subtext and just make it the text of the movie, right? This movie is
Yeah.
about symbolism and intrigue and esoteric qualities and like I don't know if Kubrick. It's hard to even tell if he ever had a late style, quote unquote, because he worked so sporadically. But
Mm,
I suppose this would be his late style. But because he was so robust as a filmmaker throughout his entire career, it's kind of absurd to talk about lateness, right? Because it felt like
mm,
every film was its own almost philosophy and statement
yeah.
on filmmaking itself. And I mean, this, right? Like we watched this, the luxurious camera movements and the long takes and the
Mm,
moving throughout the party and circling the actors. It's very like Max Ophuls and
yeah.
Orson Wellesy. It's so uh, dynamic and decadent and kind of luxurious, and you just like the film almost seduces you into its visual language in a way
Mm.
that like the more stark qualities of some of his other movies don't.
It's funny. I think there's that quote from the very famous Kubrick documentary, the one that's on all the DVD box sets that pretty much everyone has seen, is that he at one point just decided that his biggest influence was himself. Like he quite openly said, there are. I mean, he loved a lot of films, and he kind of absorbed a lot of visual language, but he was so obsessed with it that I think all you can really surmise from any of his works is that he was just trying to get like a very deep inner vision on camera. Like it wasn't about riffing, the way like another filmmaker might riff, like a Spielberg might kind of do like a bit of a Lawrence of
An
Arabia
homage,
pastiche.
right?
Yeah,
It's
with
it's like,
like
all right, this
Indiana
is
Jones.
my version of this film, right? Here's my noir,
Yeah,
here's my western, etc.
yeah, there's playful nods, or like certain images from classic cinema might work their way into like new Hollywood and things like that. I think Kubrick was like, he just knew exactly what he wanted something to look like. He knew exactly what he wanted you to feel when you're watching his films. And that doesn't really ever shift from film to film because he's so, it's just so baked into who he was. I think part of the obsession that he had was just getting exact, like himself. It's like that quote, I think it's Miles Davis saying like the hardest thing to do is to learn to play like yourself, which is that You're,
Yeah. No, I
so
mean
much
that
of,
is one of the truest statements I've ever heard.
yeah,
Like because just
100%.
at least in terms of being a writer, I found that like the biggest task is just getting out of your own preconceptions of what you're supposed to
Yeah,
be doing and just actually start doing what you're supposed to be
yeah.
doing. And
Like
that's,
so much of your
a
work,
laborious process.
yeah. I mean, so much of your work, like when you work on something or you're a filmmaker or any artist, like you say, if you're writing, is just so much of it is already like preconceived and influenced from like, the earliest steps of trying to be an artist. Like even when you're a child, things come to you and, trying to strip all that influence away and just find like your own inner vision. I mean, that I guess was what, if I was to guess what that obsession was about, I would say it's that, because he arrived at a place where he didn't need to pull from other resource to say what he wanted to say, which is kind of true and kind of not true, because when you actually break down what's like where these things come from, I mean, every Kubrick film in one way or another is an adaptation. So he's taking subjects and story material from elsewhere, but the visual language and the way these things are communicated are all his. Like he doesn't need, um, like either. I don't know. It's like you say, is that there doesn't seem to be a late period. He doesn't shift. It's like he takes the time to do it exactly how he wants it, and there's no rushing or anything like that. It's very interesting. It's a sort of case study, this one.
Yeah, he had this philosophy of total control and a minimalist way of shooting where he had like
Mm,
a couple people around in the crew and it was a very intimate atmosphere and especially by this point it was about as intimate as it could get shooting this movie.
mm,
Um
yeah.
so this whole party scene throughout the entire film there's this motif of like the glittering out of focus like spherical lens
Mm,
Christmas lights in the background and let me tell you it is like a it is very haunting to me
it is.
that
Yeah.
like he chooses to set this film during this period and have it honestly have like a complete Christmas vibe to it but then have this just debauched like really evil undercurrent that it reminds me in some ways of something like Batman Returns, right, where it's about
Mm,
uh the contrast of holiday glamour with like this underbelly of society and
mm,
how these things aren't as incongruous as you think, right? Because this is a movie about the rich and powerful and this idea that they dress themselves up in nice suits and like live in these palatial apartments in New York and have all
mm,
these lights and wandering around hobnobbing and all of it is just it's not even that it's like a sham, right? It's not a sham. It's just like the glittering lights are a part of the whole package.
mm.
It's the sleight of hand that gets you to look at that instead of what's going on underneath and
Yeah.
yeah, like there's something about that the normality that it's depicted with that um is just like like it just makes you deeply suspicious of the idea
Yeah.
of holiday joy. Like when you look at this, right? Like this giant ass staircase with just the wall
Yeah.
of lights and shit. Like
Yeah.
it's like you're entering this kind of unreal world, and then it's immediately cut to this woman slouched in a chair in this
Yeah.
fucking like messed up. Okay, and this is like look at this place. Okay, look at this. Look at this like fucking room. What is
Yeah.
this room? There's like a lamp, like a tub with like a glass like wall around it and a sofa and like you know what I mean? Like what place is this? Right?
Yeah.
Like this is not like it's it's easy to like not notice, but you're like, what kind of room is this? Is this a bathroom? Is this like a chamber room? Like what's going on
Mm.
here? And the fact that
Well,
like he's also framed behind like another naked woman,
yeah.
and the painting behind him, then like he's got one right in front. Like there's just so many layers going on. Like it's such a complexity, but Kubrick doesn't have to work that hard to establish the the nuance of his mise en scène. He just does it with these really like almost obvious gestures that are so obvious that
Mm.
they can kind of glaze over you and you're not really sure what you're seeing.
So something when I was thinking about just the Kubrick style and the approach, and just the length of time that he takes to pour over everything, and he wants to see everything. He doesn't want to miss anything. Like there's doing hundreds and hundreds of takes, but there's also when you read about just like him photographing everything and cataloging everything and looking at everything and just not wanting to miss anything. One of my favorite points in that Shining documentary, is it Room 237, the one that they're talking about? I always forget the exact number, which is doesn't bode well for my Kubrick knowledge. But the documentary, which basically explores kind of deep um, analysis of aesthetic elements in The Shining, and one of the most interesting thing that they point out in that documentary is that the physical space of the Overlook Hotel doesn't make sense. Like you see a corridor in one shot that goes round to an office with a big
Yeah,
window,
it's this
and then
non-Euclidean location.
yeah. And then later there's the same corridor that just goes to like another corridor or something. And like something about that made me realize, and thinking about this film as well, is that he is completely not concerned with he's not obsessing over these things to create realism. Like to create realism in film is it is an ordeal, it is a task to make sure that things feel authentic. But that's completely not what he's trying to do
Well,
with
also
any of his
like
films.
quote unquote realism is it's as much of a stylistic conceit as any other kind of
Yeah.
style, right? I mean, filmic realism is not fidelity to real life in most
Yeah.
cases. It's fidelity to a certain notion of
Yeah.
reality that you know, like this kind of bourgeois idea of grittiness and hard scrabble, like
Mm.
detail and minutia, right? It's fidelity to that, but really that's not. Reality is pompous and ridiculous and silly. Okay, look at this. Look at this fucking bathroom. What the?
Yeah.
There's two toilets. Like what? It's just absurd. Okay, okay, Sidney Pollack in this movie, man,
Mm.
he is so
Fucking
fucking
terrifying.
scary. He's
Yeah.
so scary.
Terrifying. He's
He
such
is.
perfect casting. Like it was originally going to be Harvey Keitel, and I can't see Harvey Keitel just bringing it the same. Like there's something so officious about Sidney Pollack, like so proper and like the kind of person you would see and probably get on with at a dinner party, and
Well,
then
he seems like
for
a
them
guy
to
you
turn
would have
around
a
and replace.
conversation with and not have anything the
Yeah.
wiser about what he does otherwise. Whereas
Yeah.
I think Keitel would have been interesting. I would have liked to see what
Yeah.
his performance of it was because it might have been decent. But
Mm.
yeah, Sidney
It would
Pollack
have
in this
definitely
is
been
just
interesting.
like
Yeah.
extremely threatening. His aura is
Yeah.
just overwhelming, and like this whole bit, like this, I hate how. Look at this, like when he's kind of slightly out of focus in the
Mm.
background, his
That's yeah.
elbows held up, like there's just like these. Uh, you just immediately like through visual language understand that there's something off here. There's like an
Yeah.
unbalance. You don't see his head, and you see that she's looking at him as much as she's looking
Yeah.
at Cruz. And
Mm. There's
yeah,
a
I
kind of
don't know.
suspicion.
Yeah, like he's got his hands like you're watching him more than you're actually watching Cruz's reaction,
Yeah.
and it's just like the layers of complexity in that shot are
Mm.
it's not like showy, but it does have a depth to it. And okay, like at some point, like I don't know when we have to engage with the whole cruise factor of this.
Oh,
I
big
don't
time. Yeah.
know. So
There will. I think there's a moment in this film later on which I feel is like it for me. So the first time I ever saw this, I was in my first year of university, and I was trying to fill in like all my Kubrick blanks, and I'd never seen this film, but I'd understood it to be a kind of outlier in his filmography, and that
well, it was
it
the
was
one that hadn't been reclaimed. It was like, oh well,
yeah,
he was older, his style faltered. This wasn't what we
yeah,
expected. That kind of horse shit. And like now, that seems
yeah.
completely insane
People gave it such a hard time when it was
because they
like
wanted
I
Basic
only knew it.
Instinct. They wanted Paul Verhoeven, and this wasn't that.
Yeah, it's such a weird take to have on a stand. It's like it's as much about, in some ways, it's as much about a erotic thrill as Jaws is about oceanography. It's like I don't go to Jaws to learn about sharks. Sorry, Christopher Nolan, but I don't do that. Like I want to. I come to a Stanley Kubrick film to have a Stanley Kubrick experience, and that's never something that you take away from like an initial release. Like, I don't know, initial releases are fucking just so
Well, but
poisonous for a
Kubrick was
film.
known for this though, because people didn't like Clockwork Orange was, famously debated when it came out. Barry Lyndon was kind of ignored and is only now really seen as one of his masterpieces.
Yeah.
The Shining wasn't really liked at all. Like The
Yeah.
Shining became what it was on videotape. So
Mm.
it's not like this was erroneous for him. I think he was his films were growers, right? You needed to sit with them and marinate with them, and
Yeah.
it's why I've watched this so many times. Is that I just no matter how, like I'm just trying to get to the bottom of
Yeah.
every aspect to it, and it's so deep that you're like, all right, now I I gotta forget the snorkel. I gotta get the fucking scuba tank, and I need to get the diving suit, right? You just need that.
Yeah. But that's the brilliant thing about like his films is that I feel like he meets everybody at their own level of sophistication. Like if you want to obsess over a film the way he does, he's baked that into the material. You know, if you want to obsess over Eyes Wide Shut about everything he's put in there, then you can. That's why he takes the time to do these things, is to add layers upon layers of detail that can point to other things in the film. You know, like it's a very superficial thing, but like you were saying with that bathroom, it's like an incredibly bizarrely constructed set, and you've got these big paintings of like naked women and the sort of framing of Sidney Pollock in the background of Tom Cruise. And you don't read those. Any other director would make a point of that. There'd be some kind of cut to him leering over this woman sort of
Well, he
intimidatingly
doesn't
or
bother
doing.
like that. That's what's great about Kubrick, and I think a lot of the best directors. It's an economy of style. He doesn't have to cut. He doesn't have to zoom in that much.
Yeah.
It's like everything is measured within an exact proportion, and it's all of a
Yeah.
stylistic piece. So it's not like I do hate that shit in movies where it's like you notice something happening, but then they're like, oh well, we got to cut to a close up to make sure that you
Yeah.
find out. It's like, no, you fucking don't.
Yeah.
Like that
It
kind of
is
stuff
like
to me
no.
reveals a sort of insecurity in your
Yeah.
storytelling capacity. Whereas Kubrick is like, no, 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 you'll get it. Like just maybe
Yeah.
not the
It's
first time,
there.
but it's there.
Yeah, it's all there, like it's the same. I feel that way very distinctly. It's like there are tells for me that kill what's going on with my relationship with what's being presented. Is the director has to kind of like overplay their hand a little bit because there's some kind of fear of, and I feel like that is the stuff that really lets a film down. And but then you watch this and you think about the reaction to it, and it's like, well, there's an element of expectation that comes with that, and not just on Kubrick, but it's like I want you. You spend like decades with Kubrick films, and then you hear here's a new one coming out, and there is a certain amount of, well, I want to feel the way I feel about all my other Kubrick films and all those other experiences, but that only comes through years and years of revisiting and removing it from the hype of what's this film going to be. I feel like a first watch or a kind of release watch is always a bit of just like getting that stuff out of the way, kind of clearing the details out of the way so that you can really like get to grips with what someone is trying to do, or what they're leaving out, what they're putting in, what they're leaving out, what's sort of behind the frame, what's like in between the frames and all the rest of it. Like this is a very weirdly constructed film in a lot of ways, but when you break it down, it's actually like makes perfect sense. And I feel like there's not something you'd want to take out of it, and that's probably the same for most of his others as well. Even something as long as Barry Lyndon, there's just nothing I'd want to take out of that. Like it's the like steadiness of it that makes it so
Yeah,
kind of
there's
absorbing.
nothing out of place really.
Yeah,
Like you couldn't go and be like, but maybe cut out this 20 minutes. Like, no, man, why would I want less Barry Lyndon in my life? Can
yeah,
we get another 3 hours of Barry Lyndon? I would fucking like,
yeah,
just do it.
pile
Let's just
on.
do it. I mean, we kind of did with The Duelist, which is basically just Barry Lyndon 2. But
Yeah, Barry
yeah,
Lyndon
like
light.
yeah, Barry Lyndon Light, yeah. Love it though. Love Ridley. But
Mm,
yeah, just also okay. Here's the thing with Eyes Wide Shut though, which is why it's my favorite Kubrick, is that
yeah.
no one else. I don't. Okay, maybe I'm wrong. And like people in the comments, if you can think of a movie that's similar to this, please let me know. What movie is like this? Who has ripped this movie off? Because no one
Mm,
has. Who has like people have ripped 2001 off to death. Full Metal Jacket,
hmm
like you know what I mean. Like there's a lot of Shining homages, this and that, whatever. Like Kubrick's been very obviously noted in terms of being an influence, but
hmm
no one's really cribbed from Eyes Wide Shut in a lot of ways. And I
Yeah.
find that interesting. Like, even
Yeah.
23 years later, you think that like someone would be like, all right, well, let me just make like a shittier version of this, but we really haven't gotten that. And I think it's a
Mm.
testament to how weird and oblong and obtuse this film is, that no one really quite knows how to get their hands around it and reduce it to a certain set of monikers, right? Like the fucking the music in 2001, right, has been like copied to death, almost to the point where like it
Yeah.
doesn't have an effect anymore. And like Clockwork Orange, there's a lot of like hyper violent stuff that has been ripped off. And The
Yeah.
Shining, like, obviously is a very influential movie. But
Mm.
the thing with this is like, who's being like, what, the weird conversation about infidelity between Cruise and Kidman? Oh yeah, like let's crib on that. No, no one ever does this. It's too weird. It's too
It's
strange.
interesting, because obviously, when if you grow up in a very kind of postmodern era like the '90s, and a lot of those things, a lot of those Kubrick references make their way to you via kind of cultural osmosis, where
Well,
you
The
know, like
Simpsons, right? Like shit like
yeah,
that. That's where it comes
basically,
to
I'm
you.
talking about The Simpsons. Yeah, is like areas like that where things get kind of referenced or spoofed, or like I remember adverts that were like with the 2001 music and that kind of arena. I mean, this film, I guess, to some degree, fell out of that kind of sphere of influence, where I wouldn't know kind of sociopolitically where to place that kind of transferal from like we have to reference ourselves to that becoming just a bit ridiculous and wherever we are now. But I guess there was that went a long way, I think, to embedding like the Kubrick style and those kind of images into kind of pop culture. And this is kind of just, again, it's the outlier, it's the last one, and only really recently I feel that people have sort of recognized it as strong as being anything else that he did.
Well, it went from being the outlier into being like, actually, this is of a piece with the rest of his work, and
Yeah,
you know,
exactly. Yeah, exactly.
yeah. Okay,
That's the
this
thing.
fucking scene. Can I just say, like, okay, the way that the editing works in so many of the
Mm,
conversations in this scene, and then the later, the pool scene. You know what
mm,
I'm talking about? Where like
yeah,
the way that the conversations are edited, it's almost like there's like in between, like when there's a cut between the various people in the scene,
mm,
having the talk. It's it's like there's like a gap between
yeah,
their words, right? It's like I say my sentence, beat, cut,
yeah,
and then you respond. Like there's some delayed, weird robotic intonation that the editing causes that
mm,
like turns it from being a kind of a pseudo, naturalistic depiction of this conflict between, this couple, and it makes it into like who are these people? Like, are these people human? You're
yeah,
so like, it's off-putting, and it's such an interesting choice to take these two, like this really like the most enormous Hollywood power couple at the time,
mm,
and make them just weird and creepy and not
yeah,
relatable. And like
inhuman.
Tom Cruise. Okay, before this movie, Tom Cruise is in fucking Mission Impossible and Jerry Maguire in the same year, and then he does
Yeah,
this, right? Like, can you
yeah,
even imagine? Like, this is there's you cannot get any higher than he was at this point. And then he
yeah,
does this, and it's like, oh, the cool, slick, you know, Tom Cruise who's he's a hotshot rookie, but he's got to learn a couple things. Like that Tom Cruise, this is not
yeah,
that guy. Like,
yeah,
and he never really is able to be that guy after this movie. After this, he's basically, a stuntman. He's basically like the team dad. He's doing he's kind of being, or he's being a bit like wacky. He's doing shit like Night and Day and the fucking Tropic Thunder cameo, right? He's like,
yeah,
this movie unlocks something in Cruise that was always there when you look at like The Firm or Cocktail, where like you see, you're like, is Tom Cruise okay? Is he all right? Like, you watch Cocktail, and
mm,
there's a part of it where his positivity, his go getter attitude is so fine, like refined, right, to a razor's
mm,
edge of likability, that it almost teeters on creepiness, where you're like,
yeah,
it, it is that Patrick Bateman thing where in Cocktail and in these other movies, he's so likable that you're like, I guess I like him, but he's also there's something like there's
It's like an
something not quite
uncanny
right
valley
here.
effect.
It absolutely is Uncanny Valley, and that's what this
Yeah,
movie is. It's Uncanny Valley Tom Cruise,
yeah,
where he's a cipher in this movie. You don't know how to feel about him. He is like a lost lamb in this hollow world, and you
yeah,
feel there's no grounding in this movie because you're with him in this journey, but you feel like the bottom could fall out under any point, right? There's none of this
yeah.
like, you know what though, Cruz is gonna, he's gonna solve this problem with his wife and he's gonna get to the bottom of this conspiracy. Like there's none of that, like that bullshit, like Hollywood plot contrivance of like
Mm,
weaving the character into the narrative. It's just like he's just like legitimately a lost guy, and he doesn't
yeah.
know why he's here, and he doesn't know what he's doing, and you're just along with him, just being an idiot. And it's a movie about like a guy who's fundamentally a fool.
Yeah. I mean, it is an amazing bit of casting, and I know just from the history that it wasn't exactly an accident, but it was just a kind of fortuitous string of events. So I don't think Stanley Kubrick was necessarily thinking Tom Cruise is the person to tell this story. But I guess the part of the process of doing so many takes is to reduce any kind of sense of ego or any kind of presentation that an actor is trying to put into a performance. And for Tom Cruise, that's really interesting. For someone I think like Tom Cruise, and maybe this wasn't understood at the time, at least in his public persona, that he is someone who he has to have control. I think Tom Cruise, if you watch in interviews, he will not allow an interview to not go his way, and
He's
like,
very managed.
yeah,
Everything
he's,
he
yeah,
knows how to turn things around with a smile and like
yeah,
tells some funny joke, or he's
yeah,
so interested, yeah, in that management of his persona. And I think it's only
but
like nowadays I think we know like how bullshit that is. But like and like there's an
yeah.
enjoyment to be made in that where you're like, this
Oh, yeah,
guy, he's so
completely, yeah.
crazy. He's doing all this for entertainment. But like if you actually talk to him in real life though, it would be an overwhelming experience. You would be distraught because you'd be
Yeah,
like, I feel like I'm talking to fucking Jesus Christ. Like
yeah,
he looks at me and I feel like I'm the only person in the room. And this movie turns that back around and makes him feel like again just like the only person in the entire universe who just doesn't
yeah,
understand what's happening to him, and
mm,
he's like the butt of the big cosmic joke at the heart of this
yeah.
movie.
It's
And
like there's that bit later on when he gets, and maybe I'm jumping the gun, bringing it up now, but he walks past the kind of like frat guys and they bash him and they call him gay. And you feel like for Tom Cruise at that era, who was probably like publicly defending like his sexuality against like,
yeah, there's lawsuits
press,
and all
like
this.
for him to do that, it's such an interesting kind of thing to put in the film. It's like, this is someone who just, if you, whose like whole ethos is, like, you will not say bad things about me. I mean, I don't mean it in that kind of reductive, childlike way, but will, like, the nature of Scientology is that
It's like you will be my
you're not
friend. I
accessible.
will overwhelm
Yeah,
you with my force of
yeah,
will. Like there's
and that's
nothing that
kind of
gets
worked
past
out
me.
in his kind of later career, is that people are really on board with him now in his sort of just like, I will literally go
Like
above
I
and
will make
beyond
myself
to,
into the Ubermensch,
yeah,
right? Like
yeah, exactly.
I,
And
I will
people are like,
force
well,
reality
no one
into
else is
my
doing it, so yeah,
yeah.
let's go with it. But in this, he is just like punished through the whole. He's
He's a
like a
putz.
supplicant to, yeah, to just everything that is happening. Like from this moment on, when she's like, I've thought about this, and there's this whole other world you have no idea about. He just becomes kind of a supplicant to that whole other world, and it's this whole internal thing that becomes kind of externalized. And for him to do that is, I think, is such an interesting performance, and I think is the difference. Like, it was originally going to be like Alec Baldwin and Kim Basinger, and I just can't see Alec Baldwin in his kind of like sly, slightly greasy, charmy way being able to pull off that same. Like, I just don't think he would have allowed himself to kind of,
Baldwin would have been
you know,
interesting because I think he would have
yeah,
had much more of a an intense aggression to the performance that would probably make him like much more of a son of a bitch and probably like unlikable, which would have been a choice, right? Maybe good, maybe bad. But
Mm.
there's a vulnerability to Cruz in this where
Yeah.
he's kind of just like a puppy dog. You just want to like reach out and be like, "Oh, you dumb fuck, like just get out of here." You know, like there's
Yeah.
like even the woman voiced by Kate Blanchett in The Party,
Mm.
she is looking at him and is like, you don't know where you are. Like you have no idea. So you need to be led back into uh your kind of bubble world where you can
Mm.
exist, and you need to disavow kind of yourself from the situation. And I mean that's what he does, and you're like, okay,
Mm.
well they I guess that's it. I guess this guy really is just, he is a schmuck. um
Yeah.
I remember hearing something that Kubrick wanted Harrison Ford, I think, originally, because he wanted
Yes.
like a real like waspy all American, kind of guy,
He
right?
wanted a chin, basically.
He wanted a chin, yeah. And if you think about
Start with
like
the
the
chin.
roles that Harrison Ford had done, him doing The Fugitive and Jack Ryan during this time, and then he
Yeah.
plays, to get off my plane. He plays the fucking president, right?
Yeah.
And can
From
you
Air
imagine
Force
like
One.
1997, he plays the president,
Mm.
and then going into this, he could have been like, but it's hard to imagine Harrison Ford being sexually emasculated, because he can be
Yeah.
like on the run, he can be definitely overwhelmed and like, just completely out of his element. But he's
Mm.
always like kind of like, oh, you know what though, he's got determination and he's got grit and there's something indomitable about him. Whereas Cruz in this just totally lets go. He falls into the fucking abyss, and
Mm.
he barely does not get swallowed up by it. And not through his like
Yeah.
wit or his skill, just because he happens to like dumb luck his way out of it. And they're like, you know what,
Yeah.
actually, it's convenient for us to let you go. So shut the fuck up and live your life
Yeah.
and don't remember what you've seen here. Like it's it's not, there's no virtues to him as a protagonist. He's not active. He's not like doing anything good. He
Yeah.
doesn't really grow as a person. In fact, if anything, you can kind of
It gets
feel
reduced.
like his soul just basically leaving his body, right? He starts out dumb and then he ends up
Yeah.
being like slightly more wise, but also just in case he's just unable to do anything about it. And it's it's just not how stories like this, even sex thrillers, there's always a
Mm.
moment where like the guy, right, the Michael Douglas guy will like get one over or have some kind of moment. You know what I mean? Like there'll be something
Yeah.
there. This nothing. Like you getting fucking nothing.
Yeah, the interesting thing about the Harrison Ford thing, two interesting points. So I read, and I don't know whether this is true, but it makes sense, is that Stanley Kubrick wanted Harrison Ford so badly. It's why he named the character Harford, because it's Harrison Ford. Like Harford is the two names put together. So that was his way of trying to tempt. I don't know what he was thinking. Like he's going to bring Harrison Ford on board by naming the character after him. But it was an interesting bit of trivia. And I think the second point that occurred to me when you were just talking about the two of them and the different approaches to the roles is that Harrison Ford, I think, is innately like he's just innately likable. Not likable is the wrong word, but there is a kind of ruggish charm that he doesn't have to play into for you to get on board with Harrison Ford. It's why he is this bigger star. It's why he starts out as a carpenter and becomes just like because he has a natural movie star quality. And
Well,
Tom
I
Cruise
also think
definitely has
like
a movie star quality
Harrison
as
Ford
well.
though is like, he's working class though. Like Harrison
Yeah,
Ford, you watch him and you get the feeling like, okay, like this is a guy, he's like a Steve McQueen guy. You feel like, okay, he's done things other than acting, right? He's lived a
yeah,
life. He isn't here. He wasn't like prefabricated. Whereas Tom
yeah.
Cruise started so young,
Mm.
and his first big movie is Risky Business. He is the perennial aspirant yuppie white guy,
Frat boy
right?
type guy,
He's
yeah.
and he it's not even frat boy, just like the kind of
I
the
think yuppie,
yuppie
yeah.
like Bud
Yeah.
Fox, like my ingeniousness is gonna get me out of all my bad situations and I'm gonna make it,
Yeah.
right. It's the Top Gun, like, God damn it, Maverick, I hate your guts, and I should kick you out of this Navy, but damn
Mm.
it, you're too good of a pilot, right? It's like, it's like, so we're gonna give you promotion. It's that no matter what, even his critics like have to be like, all right, but you're so good. And
Yeah.
even now, right, you're gonna be like people who hate Tom Cruise, but they're like, oh, you know what though? that boy did jump off that that plane. He did, fly a helicopter,
Yeah.
right? Like you can't like there's something like almost absurdist about him as a person that Harrison Ford doesn't have. Harrison Ford,
Mm.
you could be like whatever, like oh he wasn't a great actor, but he's a great movie star. He's a great
Yeah.
like he's kind of a fun guy. He's a personality. Whereas Tom Cruise is like almost a non-person in a way. It's just so
Yeah.
hard to get a read on him
He's an
because
ideological kind of personification of like a sort of like exactly like you say, like an 80s yuppie mentality, like an
yeah,
old like
he's the
overachievement,
empty like iconography of a movie star
Yeah.
version. Like he doesn't have any of the flaws, or I mean like he does, but like none of like the obvious character flaws that a lot of the 70s like methody actors have, which is interesting because it's obvious throughout his career and even working, with all these auteurs during this era and then having his square off with Sidney Pollack later. It's obvious that
Yeah.
he's like, I deeply respect guys like from the 70s, the Dustin Hoffmans of the world. I want to emulate them basically. Like he
Yeah.
wants to be that so bad, but he's just not. He's from a different era.
I think this is the key because the thing about putting a Tom Cruise and a Harrison Ford is Tom Cruise just feels very cultivated. Like the image feels very cultivated. The way he's thought very carefully about what he wants people, how he wants to be perceived, and how he wants to be thought of. And I think the character of Bill Harford is kind of the same thing. There is an aspect of presentation. I mean, the whole film is about presentation. It's about putting on a front for what how you will present yourself to your husband or your friends and whatever, and like what goes on underneath it. I mean, that's a very kind of bit of a glib reading, but effectively that I think is just works so in Tom Cruise's favor. And like it's like I was watching, and this is a bit of a sort of tangent, but I watched Master and Commander the other day, and Russell Crowe is someone I think who has a similar issue with like public personas. People think of him as aggressive, and he's just kind of a bit self-centered, and people don't relate to him that way. But that his character in that in Master and Commander becomes kind of very likable because you want a sort of warmongering bastard at the helm of a ship, and you put that against Paul Bettany's sort of slightly more naturalist doctor who's very studious, and have them be friends is you enjoy that friendship and you enjoy both sides of that. I think it's the most I've liked Russell Crowe, and I think this film is the most I've enjoyed just like a Tom Cruise performance. Obviously, like the Mission Impossible, I feel like you like him in a different ways. You admire someone doing going to great lengths to create an
Well, there's an
entertainment piece.
audacity there. There's a Buster
Yeah,
Keaton quality where you're like, okay,
yeah,
no matter how you feel about like this guy, it's like okay, but like no one else is doing this on this level, and so there's like
yeah,
there's this baseline level of uh understanding that can go on there, and even I think with a lot of his performances, though, I think no matter what he's doing, that quality is present, right? When you watch Interview with a Vampire, like the guy's such a crazy dude. He was like, oh, let me like file down my teeth so I have actual vampire teeth. And like he
yeah.
wanted to do that shit. And they were like, no, Tom, please don't do that. Like, for like and you watch his performance in this and Magnolia in the same year. I mean, it's really astonishing
Yeah,
stuff. And it's like he's such a his his talent is so particular in that like most movie stars, there's almost like a not a quality of like I could be them, but like I could understand them. Whereas I don't
mm,
think I don't think anyone understands Tom Cruise. I don't even think Tom
yeah,
Cruise understands him.
yeah,
I
yeah,
think it's just completely like a series of paper masks that you rip off one and another one is right underneath it. And
yeah,
this movie is all about, like you said, presentation and obligation and your role in society. And
yeah,
it's like look at this right here. Like when like when this woman is just like about to throw everything away for this encounter with this doctor who's like he just points out like yeah we've really never had a real conversation with each other. Like it's almost
yeah,
Kubrick like playing a joke on the idea of like movie star magnetism, right? Where
Mm.
oh, it doesn't matter what's going on, but you know what? Everyone thinks that Cruz is hot and all this kind of shit. Like
Yeah.
it's that kind of stuff, which usually I think a lot of people go along with and we kind of joke about it and haha, whatever. But this movie, I
Mm.
think, actually interrogates. You're like, yeah, why do people? Why does Bill Hartford get away with the stuff that he's involved
Yeah.
in? And when you get down to it, you're like, it's because he's rich enough to skate by, because he's lucky,
Yeah.
because he's a white dude in a world that affords many possibilities and opportunities and points of forgiveness for the mistakes of
Mm.
white men who are rich. And like it's a hard reality where you take it out of the realm of the movie star applicability, and then you render it as to like kind of something that's much more hard and thorny to deal with.
Mm. Do you think it is a purely sociological thing that is going on? Because I've always felt that there's no Kubrick film that I actively dislike, but sort of the ones like Clockwork Orange and Full Metal Jacket, I feel are, for me at least, slightly beneath like this film or Barry Lyndon, just because there is such a strong sociological kind of process going on in those films, especially in Full Metal Jacket. But these, like Eyes Wide Shut, is so felt always has always felt to me like so much more of an internal kind of conflict going on, and that's kind of what's driving things. So yeah, it's interesting for you to point out that there is like an economic reasoning behind just this character being able to sort of walk
Well, I think
immune
there's
to
echoes of Barry Lyndon
rules.
here, right? It's like how does
Yeah,
Barry Lyndon get away with all his stuff? It's like, well, he just happened to be at the right place at the right time. Like he's
yeah,
not like a smart or intelligent or worthwhile person. He's a fucking
yeah.
loser. But like that's the grand humor of that film. Whereas I think here it is slightly humorous, but honestly, because of that sociological aspect that you point out, it actually is like uh, kind of harsh and atonal and like uncomfortable because
Mm,
like even in this fake New York City set that Kubrick builds, you do feel
yeah.
like you know what though, like that is just like a harsh truth that despite any of the craziness of this movie, you can't
Mm,
really run away from the fact that it just is true. And
yeah.
I think especially in his encounters with the sex workers in their home, like there's a quality in there where it feels like he's kind of like a predator. There's
Yeah.
like he's an intruder in a space that is foreign to him. And I think the
Yeah.
class element is never really too far away from this movie.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely.
And
Especially in this next scene is I think where it really, like you say, it's you've got this sort of apartment that is run down and he just looks so out of place, you know. He's
also,
like
okay,
consuming the space
tell
around him.
me if these scenes, this is totally reminiscent of what would come out a year later with American Psycho. And there's no way,
Mm,
obviously, that like they could have cribbed what from whatever, but like
mm.
the kind of the fakeness and the eerie quality,
The
it's
music as
totally
well is very
identical. Like him wearing the
yeah.
big overcoat with the gloves, you know what I mean? It's like the New
Yeah.
York like yuppie stalker milieu, and again, like also with sex workers, just like in that movie. There's so many similarities between this and American Psycho that I find
Mm,
they make like an interesting companion piece where like one is like much more internalized and this is much more about like the blank surfaces of that
mm.
reality. And but yeah, like they're definitely both like infatuated with this idea of like inner and outer and that correspondence between your public self and your private self and whether that matters. And
Yeah.
like ultimately I feel like the films come down both on the idea that like really doesn't matter what kind of person you are on the inside, because if you inhabit a certain role in society, no one gives a shit, and all your sins will be
Yeah.
forgiven, and you'll be given a pass because of, your appearance, right? Your appearance is way more important than, any kind of, deep reservoir of emotion that you may possess or any, sense of depravity. All that's like
Mm.
essentially immaterial. And I
Yeah.
mean, that is like a deeply, deeply, deeply cynical conclusion, but I mean, it like 1999, 2000, it's interesting um, analysis of like New York City as this kind of glassy surface where nothing actually means anything, and it's all
Mm.
um, just airy and like none of that shit that we usually are taught that matters actually matters in this sort of world.
Yeah, I keep thinking about just when I'm watching clips of this, when I was preparing and just looking at images, like, I've got the big old Kubrick book with all those like sort of 3D, 35 millimeter transfers from the actual film negative. And I just look at them and I think that this is not, this is deliberately supposed to be like what's the word? Not like it's not New York, it's a representative, it's kind of like a synecdoche
It's a
for New
simulacra of New
York.
York.
Yeah, exactly. That's the exact word. Like because obviously this is filmed in England, and there are shots like earlier on when there's that montage of Nicole Kidman, like around the flat during the daytime. Is I don't quite know how to describe, but it's London light. Like having lived in London, like the light is very English. Like I know that's weird, something to do with where the sun sits in the sky and it comes in a certain
Well,
way,
it might
and
just
there's
be
a
like
certain
the kind of
radiance.
light bulbs and the way the electricity is rendered in, because like
Yeah,
there are different ways of that, and
yeah.
like
It
there's
seems
something, yeah, there's like
superficial,
a
but
tangibleness to it.
I feel like he's again, like going back to what I was saying before, he's really not interested in like replicating New York, even though he absolutely is. Like I was reading that apparently he had people go to Manhattan and measure like the widths of the streets and the distance between one post box and another just to kind of create an authenticity. But it's very separate from realism. It's not really realism. It's not really dreamlike either. It's I suppose a kind of hyper realism, but
Well, it's
it's
that
about
interesting. Like, tell me if you think this is wrong, but so many movies in the late '80s and '90s were very set bound, right? If you think about the
yeah,
Tim Burton Batman movies again, if you think about The Crow, if you think about um,
mm,
even stuff like the Rock with like the Alcatraz set, like there's a
yeah,
lot of elements where it's almost like a away from the 70s and 60s naturalism, and like we're back to the
yeah,
studio, we're back to the kind of hermetically sealed environment of Gotham City, where every street is slick with rain and there's fog everywhere. Like that stuff really
yeah,
starts with movies like Streets of Fire, but it
yeah,
definitely kind of blossoms um, in that you know that late '80s blockbuster era, where now it's like, okay, we're not doing location shooting so much anymore. Now, we're going back to the rigorous controlled standards of these artificial spaces, and I
yeah,
think you know it's interesting that Kubrick also, he's always played with both kinds throughout his career, but you couldn't get anything farther from something like Barry Lyndon, which is such a lush, painterly. That
mm,
you see the clouds in every shot, right? Like that's so far away from something like Eyes Wide Shut, which no
yeah,
part of this really feels real. It's not like obviously fake or stylized. It's not
yeah,
it's not a German expressionist type of story,
mm,
but it's just, again, it's uncanny. It's just out of the realm
yeah,
of reality enough to where you notice it and you're like, something's a bit off here. It's not quite the New York City that I see in pictures or that I've walked on the streets with. And it's
mm,
like you pointing out the Londonness of it, right?
yeah.
There's
Being filmed sort of in the sphere of, I mean, I think it's like half. Well, actually, no, I think Elstree, which is in just outside of like Greater London, they call it. There's just an English light about it, and I guess if he lives there long enough, that sort of thing starts. If because I think, but at this point, he hasn't been to New York for like 30 or 40 years. I mean, if he grows up there, that kind of thing, I guess, never really leaves you. But I don't know. It's a really interesting aspect of the.
it's an Anglophile, telling a story about
Yeah,
the most American city, and kind of
yeah,
bringing these weird prejudices towards that, and creating something that's distinctly like a space that can only exist in the cinema. There's no
yeah,
way that this could exist otherwise, because it's this weird hybrid of whatever. It's like how the Detroit of RoboCop infamously wasn't really
yeah,
Detroit, but in your head. And when they built the RoboCop statue in actual Detroit, it's like, okay, but that's Detroit, right? Like there's a certain point at which like the cinematic overtakes the real, and this rendition of New York will always be something I don't know, it's not overlapping that the real image of it just because of the
Mm.
iconography, but it's almost like a liminal alternate space that, you know, if you walk down the right street in New York City, you could end up in the Eyes Wide Shut street, and
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
like it gets folded into that greater tapestry.
Yeah, it genuinely feels like when he appears on the street and they get into the street set that he could have been walking for like years, and he's just like, or he's like, it's the way you wander into. And again, this is a bit of a glib observation because I feel like the dream comparisons are kind of not necessarily surface level, but quite explicit to really register much interest. But it is the way when you're in a dream as you appear in a place sort of kind of spontaneously. You know, there is no, you don't arrive, there's no arriving somewhere, there's just arriving. You know, you just are there. And that's kind of what this set feels like, is that you're dreaming about New York and where you would kind of appear. It's also, this set is just bonkers. Like when you see the wide shots and you realize, like I feel like a certain kind of attachment to what you were talking about, just gigantic sort of city sets. Like I remember watching The Crow when I was quite young and thinking like,
Oh my
is
god.
this what cities look like? This is
I I I
amazing.
I
Like
deeply
these
miss that
incredible
shit.
places.
That shit holds such a
Yeah,
special place in my heart.
yeah.
The
I'm very attached to that as well. The
yeah, the
Matrix as
cr-
well. That whole kind of
yes.
urban
Yes,
aesthetic,
definitely.
like that anonymity. It's like I
Well,
love that stuff.
it's the neo Gothic, neo German expressionist style, neo
Yeah.
noir kind of like cityscape. Highlander 2 also has this, as well as the first
Oh,
Highlander.
really?
Yeah, like it's there's something. Yeah, I really think it starts. I don't know. There's parts of like Thief, like the Michael Mann movie, that kind of feel
Sure.
like this. But I think Streets of Fire really is the touchstone for so many of these, because you watch that and
Yeah, definitely.
it's, you know, that way, that like that kind of anonymous whatever city that takes place in, you know, like that feels kind of like you could walk down the avenue and you're like, okay, I'm in Gotham City, or I'm in The Crow. Wait, does The Crow, is that also in Detroit, or is that in somewhere else?
I think it has. If I could be very wrong on this, but I feel like it has a fake, like a Gotham-esque kind of fake
No,
city
I think
name
it's a
with
real
a monument.
place. I think it's
Oh,
real because
okay.
they mention like one of the real Great Lakes in America. I'm pretty sure it's real, but yeah, I don't fucking remember. But yeah, okay. So, dude, it, Tom Cruise, whenever he's like in a club in a movie, or he goes
Uh-huh.
someplace to listen to music, like in Collateral, like
Yeah.
it always feels like Tom Cruise has just never listened to music before in his life, and he's like, wow, great jazz, great playing, I clap.
Yeah.
Like, it's like, man, did fucking like the man who fell to earth just step onto the movie set, and he's about to figure out the contours of human art and what expression means, and just, yeah, and oh my god, this club. I mean,
Yeah. Fucking this
I
set
kind
is
of
unbelievable.
I kind of want to be in it, but also it
Yeah.
seems like kind of fucked up and shady. Like
It's the
there's,
orb, like placing
yeah,
an orb in
the
front of
weird
someone
orb. Yeah,
just
it's the Donald Trump
psychologically.
orb. It's
Yeah.
the I'm contemplating the
Psychologically,
spheres.
yeah, there is an element of like you're getting into the mystical, you know, when you're just
Well, you
that's the
also,
key, I think.
it's a little bit like it's kind of really dimly lit, like,
Yeah,
and there's like, yeah, that's the soft glow of it, and yeah, the use of lighting in this movie. I mean, it doesn't really get much better than this. It really doesn't.
yeah,
Everything is so immaculate.
yeah.
Um,
I think the key is just I've gotten to a point, having made films and just directed stuff, is that you get very you notice lights in a shot, like, and it happens. You probably, even if you don't sort of make films, is there is a presence in a shot of a film that feels off, and you realize that light is being introduced where it's not motivated. And this is kind of a bit of a reservation I have with television, although I do enjoy a lot of shows on a kind of story basis, is they don't concern themselves with motivated lighting. It's like,
well, it's
do
functional,
we?
right? It's like, all
Yeah,
right, we don't
it's
need
just
you
a
to,
light thing.
we don't need you to read the image. We need you to comprehend the image.
Yeah,
And
the
to be
standards
frank,
like,
that's, yeah, fuck that. Yeah, I agree.
yeah,
Like it's like,
yeah,
to me, that's why I have like, basically, unless it's something heavily stylized like Miami Vice or something,
yeah.
I have next to no interest in television
Yeah.
because, uh, frankly, it's just it neglects the virtues of the cinematic medium. When you're talking
Yeah.
about light, when you look at a sequence like this, right, with the amount of color and
Mm.
like the contrast with the actors' bodies and the darkness and like
Yeah.
which every way that light is bouncing off people's faces, if you aren't taking advantage of the space provided by that, then what are you doing? Why are you telling stories
Yeah.
in a visual medium? Like,
Completely.
because that's what you have to do. Like, it doesn't have to be
Yeah.
exactly like this, right? Your movie doesn't have to look like Eyes Wide Shut, but you know,
Doesn't hurt.
yeah, it doesn't hurt, but I think it's just like so many TV shows I see, and it's everything's overlit, and there's kind of
Yeah. It's
like
flat,
the
very flat.
background is always like soft focus,
Mm.
and you're like, okay, like I can't see the environment, I can't see really anything that the outside of the performance, right? Like
Yeah.
TV gets called a writer's medium, but I'll be honest, it's as much of like an actor's vanity kind of thing, I feel,
Yeah.
where it's I have a lot of scenes that I get to act out, and I got a lot of monologues that I can chew on, and not
Yeah.
like trying to shit on actors or whatever, but it's simply within their interest. You got to think, if you're an actor, right, outside of being in the theater, being in TV is when you get the most opportunities to actually act, right? Just
Mm.
in terms of like the time and the scale and what you're actually doing. And so, like there's this idea of, well, all you need to see is someone's face in the frame, really, and everything else is immaterial. And
Yeah.
I just find that boring as shit. This is okay,
Yeah.
like you're watching this, and this is obviously the scene is focused on these two faces, but like you never lose sight of the space they're in, right? Because there's such a
Yeah.
strong presence of the lighting of the bar, and like
Mm.
this
The neon
idea that
sign.
these men are like kind of surrounded by this tinsel town of bullshit neon, but they're having this
Yeah.
dark, like ominous conversation in the middle of all that, right? Like it's telling a
Mm.
story with the lighting, and
Yeah.
it's just
Completely.
what you do. Like, just to be frank, I don't have any room, in my appreciation for anything that doesn't do otherwise. Like
Yeah.
if you like just don't bother, I mean, like fuck it, right? Like what are we doing here? What are we trying to do?
Yeah.
Like are we trying to make bread without flour here? Like like come on.
Yeah. I think this is the key, isn't it? Is that everything in a Stanley Kubrick film submits itself to the film. It's not, and I think it's a bit like if you watch documentaries about him, there's a lot of kind of talk about like, well, it was his genius and it was his vision, and he was those things. I don't like to kind of lionize, but he was those things absolutely. But I think what he was going after was that nothing needs to necessarily overwhelm the just the environment, the place that you're being taken to. Like he wants everything to completely absorb you. And I know that's weird because people say, well, the photography is so gorgeous, but it's only that way because he is very exacting in how he presents information. I think the editing of his films, like we were talking about in the conversation, has as much to do with what involves you in his films as the cinematography or the performances. He does multiple takes and he's grinding down an actor trying to, overplay their hand or kind of, just reach too far out of the frame to stand out. He's kind of just, he's trying to dispel all that and he's trying to allow you to be completely immersed in a world which would fit the story. I think that's kind of the whole ethos, really. And
Yeah, he does a kind of a quasi Brissonian thing,
yeah,
which is you can imagine like somewhat grueling for everyone involved, but at the same time, like when you watch the Kubrick movies and then when you watch Bresson movies, it's hard to argue with the result. Really, you're like,
yeah,
well, goddamn, when the
yeah,
when the meal tastes this good, I'm just gonna let the chef cook.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah, see this bit, right? Look, like the easy framing of this, when you
Mm,
see like all the bits are, even though he's trying to get into this place, it's Cruz that's behind bars. It's Bill that
mm,
like seems trapped, even though he's trying to get into this place. That like it's simple visual stuff like that. You're like, you don't actually have to do that much to tell this kind of story, right? Like it's
mm,
it's like stuff that like just subtle gestures. That's all it takes to really, you know, basically trick your eye into understanding something that you wouldn't
Yeah.
otherwise. Even if you're not conscious of it, you're like, you get what's going on here.
Mm.
Because you realize
You
like
mean
this guy is a rat in a maze and he doesn't know where he's going, and this guy is
sure.
about to trap him in some shit that he probably doesn't want to be in.
Yeah. And that is I think so hard to do, which I guess is why you develop an approach which is, I'm going to make you do 100 takes of this, and the first 10 are going to be, you're going to show your stuff, whatever preparation you've done, we're going to get that out of the way, and then it's going to be terrible for about 60 takes, and then by take like 70, we've gone beyond all of that. We're in the id at this point. The ego and superego have been obliterated, and we're just feeding off like kind of just some completely unprepared, unrehearsed urge. And it's purely just about needs. It's about like one person's need against another, and that's where you get kind of like, I mean, it'd be very interesting to see what takes are actually picked out of like, just conversation scenes, like that scene between the costume owner and Tom Cruise through the window. Like, it's a very functional scene. It's just Tom Cruise wants to get a costume, and he's convincing this guy to let him into his costume shop. And it's a very clear kind of goal versus sort of setback situation. But like, what does a Stanley Kubrick choose out of probably what was lots and lots of takes? Like,
Well,
is it going to be?
all the shit could have been, you could easily just been like shot, reverse shot,
Mm,
no blocking, no, like, you know what I mean? Like, it could have just been like the most boring shit in the world. Instead, he's like, nah, like, this is going to tell a story. Like, every shot has to
yeah,
tell a story. It doesn't matter what it
yeah,
is. All right. So our boy here who
mm,
plays this fucking bastard. So
yeah.
I always thought that I swear to God that he's in one of the John Wick movies, but he isn't.
He's
I
in
feel
Mission Impossible 2.
yes, he's
Yeah,
Dr. Petrovich or whatever in Mission
yeah,
Impossible too.
yeah.
To create a bad guy, we have to create a good guy, or whatever the fuck he says.
Chimera.
Chimera,
Yeah,
Bellerophon, like Mission Impossible 2. Incredible movie, by the way. Fucking everyone should
yeah,
watch that shit.
yeah, yeah.
Um, it rips.
That's one I'm very attached to. From
It,
when
we
yeah,
should we should do a
film
commentary
time.
on MI too.
I fucking do
it's,
that every
it's
day.
so fun.
I do
It's
that.
so fun.
There's so
Also,
much in that
it's
film.
like the film that he made right after this, and
Yeah, like he was
that
waiting to go.
that's hilarious.
He must have brought this guy. This is where he's like, they're in the sort of casting meetings for, because he's a producer on all the Mission Impossibles. They're in the casting meetings. He must have been like, I've got your Russian scientist right here.
Yeah. Bring him in. Bring him in. Well,
Well,
and then this guy also, I can't pronounce his fucking name because it's like some like
yeah,
Eastern European thing. I'm not gonna like mispronounce it because I feel like this
yeah.
is a discredit to him. But he's also Boris the Blade in Snatch.
Oh, sure, yeah. I
Yeah,
forget about Snatch.
and he's so good in there. And like that's a year after this too, so he's getting some
Yeah.
work. So this shit. Do you think this is a setup? Like, is this real or is this like a fake out thing? Like,
Well,
because I've heard different takes on this.
by the time they get back to it, I mean, this is one of those things that when I first saw this film, I really didn't understand what it was going for, and it didn't break the film for me, but it threw me a lot. I was like, there is
You
this
were like, what
kind
the
of
fuck is going on?
well, yeah, is this like a development of his temptation? Is this kind of a reflection of like this burgeoning infidelity and the dangers of his burgeoning infidelity? I think it's just like, by the time this comes back round, because everything in this film sort of loops back round, it's this sort of ascent up until, the kind of scene in the manor, and then everything is kind of a descent and unraveling of what has occurred during this night. And then in the net, I mean, like in the next instance that you see these characters, everything's kind of been resolved. Like something has transpired over between the time that he is here now and then later when he goes to return the costume. And I guess I don't want to be kind of superficial about it, but I guess he's just using it as a way of moving things, like creating a connection between all these things. But maybe that's a bit of a, I don't know, maybe I'm missing something there. I don't know. What's your take on it? Like, where does it fit
Um,
into
I mean,
the grand
my
scheme?
thing is, I think it's real. I just think it's weird because a lot of people
Yeah.
say like basically like it's a performance for the sake of Bill, but I don't. Yeah, I don't quite buy that. I think I think it's just like it's like his first taste of the underworld, right?
Mm.
The kind of the everyday conspiracy, right? Of sexual abuse and
Oh, sure.
pedophilic
Yeah.
bullshit, and you know what I mean. Like it's him essentially like being like, oh, like is this actually happening? It's he's a babe in the woods literally right now, but like
Yeah.
there's a moment where like his naivety about the world that he's in like is about to be shattered, and that's kind of his
Yeah.
first engagement with that. Okay, so this whole fucking mansion
Mm.
thing, so cursed.
Yeah.
It creeps me the fuck out, man.
Yeah.
This is like the ultimate like Alex Jones like paranoid
Like
like
Bohemian
like
Grove.
like
Yeah.
it really does make me like I'm like, oh fuck, these goddamn fucking people out here. There's no Moloch or anything, but it's still like
Same
this.
vibes.
So this is the most hilarious shit when this comes up later though, when he's like, all right, cab, I need you to stay out here and wait for me. Look in the
Yeah.
background. The two guys are staring at him. Look at
Yeah.
that. Look at that. They're staring
Yeah.
at him. Like they
It's
know. You know what I
very
mean?
good.
It's so obvious, right? But they
I'd
look just
actually
like
never noticed that
trees.
before.
Yeah, look at
It's
them.
horrible.
So like when they come up and they're like, "Yeah, is that your cab?" He's so dumb, right?
Yeah.
He thinks
Doing
he's
this in a
being
cab.
sly and being like, "Oh, I'm so rich. I'll just pay for you to stay here." It's like,
This
man,
is this
you could get this taxi driver killed. You could get him
yeah.
fucking killed for being around here.
This is the genius of like the Tom Cruise element, because you always feel like a Tom Cruise film hinges on that he is someone who you believe can control a situation around
He's
him, but
competent.
really has
He
no
can do
control.
whatever.
Like
Yeah.
he appears very charming. Like I can't remember much of Risky Business. It's been so long since I've seen it, but it's a similar premise, is that he's a kind of like yuppie upstart who's going to make his way in the world and convince people he can make a lot of money, and then it kind of falls apart, or there's some kind of lie. I don't really remember the plot, but
Well,
the
it's interesting
vibe I
because
get off it
Risky
is
Business in that he essentially, you know, creates his own brothel in his
yeah,
house, right? And like that's the way he succeeds in the world. It's kind of played
yeah,
in like a relatively like sensitive and well-meaning way, especially for the
yeah,
time. I think more than other like six comedies of the day did. But in this, I think it's interesting how this plays with the iconography of that, where it's now
yeah,
he's like entering this like basically like a sex trafficking orgy underworld,
yeah,
and he's like now that he's no longer the kind of like the plucky dude, he's like entering into this much more ancient form of ritual abuse and fucking just like it's him realizing that he is a little minnow swimming in a pond full of sharks and
yeah,
you're just like, yeah, dude, you like again, like she says later, you don't belong here. And this shit's so fucking funny where he's got like his big ass cloak and
yeah,
like he looks so vulnerable under this mask.
yeah.
There's something intensely like almost wounded about the way that he
I
operates
think
in this scene.
it may, I mean, this is just sort of conjecture, but I feel like the mask being pale and so face like when you see some of the other shots of the masks, they're like incredibly abstract contortions of like a face mode. Like there's like the pointy guy, and there's one which is like a kind of oblong triangle through like a circle, but his is so deliberately not literally green, but like it is, pale and kind of pure, and it's just it's very close to being like a human face. I think it's as closest to a human face out of any of the masks. And yeah, God, it's this music is so incredible. I forget this bit of music. Just
Yeah. So okay, I can't tell if this is Latin or not, dude. If anyone fucking like knows, like anyone listening, if you know like what this chant is actually saying, because I have no idea.
mm,
I would like to know, even
yeah,
if it's like
it's
fake
reversed,
Latin or
isn't it?
whatever.
I think
Is it
it's
what?
I think it's
Gregorian?
Gregorian
Yeah.
chant that's been reversed, so it's
Oh, is
backwards.
it?
So
Okay,
they
yeah.
have
Like,
to go
dude,
and
yeah.
reverse it
Someone
totally.
link me to like the chopped and screwed version where they play it back the right way because I want to hear what it is, even if it's nonsense.
Yeah.
So shout out to your boy who's like blindfold and playing that piano. Just fucking
Mm,
what a pro. What a pro. Can you imagine though? Like,
yeah.
okay, like if you were like an expert pianist and you got
Mm.
invited to something like this, like would you go? Like would you be like, ah, sure? Like if they just straight up told you, like, yes, this is what will happen, like
I don't know. Like I'm
because
always
you know you're gonna get like CIA iced like a couple years down the line when you're like,
yeah,
all right,
that's the thing, isn't it?
you're a disposable
Like
asset.
I'm always like uber curious about the kind of limits of societal accessibility, like where like
You're the Bill
spaces where
Hartford in this scenario. You're
yeah,
like,
I
oh
am, but
yeah,
like I think if
I can get
someone's
away with
like,
this.
there's an uber super secret society and this is the password, so if you want to sneak in, do that. I would be so tempted, but I would always think, if I get rumbled, it's like that thing, that X-Files episode, that creature that, like, if it sees you it will kill you, maybe not like tomorrow but sometime in the years in your life, it will just random, like that kind of feeling of like you'll never escape something that you've put yourself in. It's one
You
of
ain't
those
retiring
situations.
for this. Like that
Yeah,
motherfucker. You know, if it wasn't for Cruz like getting his ass killed in this, uh,
yeah,
what would end up happening was like it's like, yeah, man, all right, this is your job for life now. You're gonna play
yeah,
piano at these fucked up
yeah.
gatherings.
You can never speak about these things. Like they're always kind of watching, like
Oh,
they're
dude.
always
Well, speaking of
yeah,
watching, yeah, this shit
yeah.
is so creepy.
Oh, it's
Where it's like,
horrible.
see, this is the nightmare. Like, this is the dream logic, though, where it's like, how do
Yeah,
they know? You know what I mean? Because it's like no one's seen communicating with them.
yeah,
So like, you get the impression that like, yeah, something's wrong, but I don't know. Like, it's just yeah. Okay, the way that Cruz's eyes look in this, just
yeah.
something.
It
It's
melts into the mask. Like the mask just
yeah.
appears as if it's a face. Like if you look at the guy on the right, it feels like a mask. Like the eyes sit within the mask as though there is a face on top of
There's
the
like a
face.
more like Renaissance like festival quality with the
Yeah,
rest of them.
but the mask on Tom Cruise appears as though it is a face, and it really, he has no mask. He's kind of exposed, quite literally and figuratively. This dude is wearing like 6-inch platforms as well, like make himself. Oh no, he's not in
Yeah.
this shot. I've
Well,
seen a behind the scenes photo where he's wearing like
oh,
massive
really?
shoes.
Might be for certain
Yeah,
shots. I don't know. Maybe like when he's
yeah,
like
yeah,
standing across from Cruz.
yeah. This was Leon Vitali, I think, plays who was Kubrick's assistant, plays the red cloak guy,
Oh, okay.
and he was like, he worked with Kubrick on everything. He was like an actor. He plays Lord Bullingdon in Barry Lyndon. So he's the
Oh,
when they have the duel, but he became like really close with Kubrick and worked with him.
dude, can you imagine like Kubrick calls you up and he's like, "All right, I got a part for you," and like you show up and this is what he's got for you. You're just like,
Well,
okay,
apparently, because he was his assistant, he would make him do this, and then like they'd be shooting for days, and then there'd be like a call that they had to fly in, something, like I don't know, someone's come in, so Leon would have to basically literally disrobe and then go and pick someone up from the airport and then go get like Kubrick's lunch or whatever, and then come back, put the cloak on, and do like another like 11 hours of shooting or whatever it is.
Jesus
This is
Christ.
pretty demanding. That's Stanley for you.
Yeah, when I die, I'm gonna have this song like play at my funeral just to fuck with
Nice.
people.
I
I'm
think I
just gonna
might
be
just have
like,
my
all right.
funeral be this, like
You
just as whole as that.
you might just be like, all right,
Um,
actually, guys, how long I've
from
been a part of the Illuminati, and you
yeah,
know, big
just to
joke,
fuck
but
with people, like not explain it, but this is my funeral.
you see, okay, like the pause in that line, I think you've mistaken me for someone.
Mm,
Like there's weird little pauses in some of the dialogue. It's like it all amounts to this sense of doom, and you're just
mm,
like, I mean, every time I watch this movie, I'm like, Bill Hartford's gonna fucking die. Like he's just gonna
Yeah.
die. Like this is it's gonna happen this time, and it never does. I'm always like, how did this fucker make it? Like,
Yeah.
like
I think it's
literally, like
yeah.
this is the like you just send it to hell. Like literal fucking like the most spooky place you could go to. That's not Dracula's castle. And he's
Yeah.
like, you know what though? Shopping for toys with my wife and my kid. Like, wow.
Do you think this goes some way to explaining why it had such an effect on you watching it, maybe younger than perhaps you were able to fully comprehend the context, but just the way, I mean, this is the great power of cinema, is that the way music is transmutable regardless of age or kind of where you're from, is that the image, how fast something moves tells you about what the film is, or it tells you about what the characters are, how characters talk, and whether they talk slow or fast. Like there's a whole mood created by the sort of interplay of performance and image and editing, that it creates like a feeling in you. I mean, obviously horror is quite explicitly designed to do that, is that there are certain ways you deliver a line in a horror, there's certain types of music you use, and they can work on all levels of sophistication. And although this isn't a horror, it is fucking terrifying for
Well, it definitely
these
came
reasons.
across that way to me as a kid. I was like, this is a spooky movie. This is,
Yeah.
yeah. I'm sorry. Like, what was your question? Like, because I feel like I kind of had something to answer with, but I kind of lost what you were questioning about.
I guess I know exactly when you say that there is just an incredibly cursed energy to this film. I feel like I know exactly what you mean by something being terrifying and not quite being a horror. And it's kind of my favorite feeling you can get from a film, is feeling like a film has encroached itself upon you. And I'm just really interested in like why you think, like what's going on in a film specifically that you think creates that effect with you.
I think, I mean, I think why this film has always stuck with me so much is that, like, this was the first exposure that my young mind had to the idea that, like, there would just be secret backroom things that would happen that
Mm,
were in continuity with the rest of daily life, and that like it like weirdly like this movie, because it rides the line between artificiality and naturalism,
mm,
it's like ends up bleeding into both. And so it felt like it took this horror space and made it seem like, you know what though, like, because I remember watching this with my dad, and I was like, what's going on, because I didn't really understand. And like he would basically say like, well, they're a part of like a secret group. And I was like, what do you mean? And like he's like, oh, it's a conspiracy. And like I never really heard that term before.
yeah.
And yeah, just like going into it, like that definitely like led me down that certain series of rabbit holes, which like I have a lot of like different feelings about at this point. But
Mm,
it's interesting in as much as I feel this presents like it's almost like a Rorschach test movie, and that
mm,
you see what you want to see in it. And it's like, if you're like some like dipshit right winger, like this is proof of like the whatever cabal, you know what I mean? Like
yeah,
it's
yeah.
it's that kind of thing. Whereas like now I see this as like being like, oh no, this is the like essentially the habitual like, covert and like, surprisingly casual like sex trafficking, and
Yeah.
all that nightmare stuff that goes on within, groups of people who are so rich that basically the only like thing you can do with all that money is transgress in some way or another. And
Mm,
like it's just one of those things where I suppose, like, yeah, when it comes to like the impact and all that, it opened up like it's like it opens up the space between the exoteric and the esoteric, where they no
mm,
longer seem that different, right? It goes beyond oh, this is, something for blah blah blah. You get to have a glimpse of what being on the inside of this looks like, and
Yeah.
how just like deceptively, uh, what was the right word? Almost like everyone is like really calm, and like you walk in here and it's kind of slow, and it's not
Mm.
loud, and it's not really that debauched. It's just like it's normal, right? The
Yeah.
conspiracy is normal. It's just people slow dancing, and then
Yeah.
some of them are naked, right? There's there's a quality to it that is mundane, and that to me is what has always stuck with me about this movie, is that it's not just like it's not only that this stuff is out there and it exists, but that is like not this cordoned off part of reality that you can just be like,
Yeah.
well, that's over there. That's all that crazy shit over there, right? It's not like, when I was a kid and I watched Alien, and I could be like, well, that's scary, but you know what though?
Yeah.
Like that was on another planet and they were in a spaceship, and like
Mm.
that'll probably never happen to me. Whereas like
Yeah.
when I saw this, I was like, oh man, like if I walked down a dark alleyway or went into the wrong house, like you could stumble
Yeah.
on something that you weren't supposed to see. And that was
Yeah.
like really scary and frightening. And
Yeah.
I mean, to be honest, it still is. Like this movie still makes me fucking paranoid as hell, because
Yeah.
I'm like, well, if I was in that place, I wouldn't be there in the first place. I would run my ass away, because you know what I mean. It just like you just get to think it in your head, because Bill Hartford is so vulnerable in this scene. You feel like, oh man, like I would just never want to be in this scenario to
Mm.
begin with. I would do everything I could, because it's like he gets brought up here and the guy's talking to him, and it's almost like he's just here to be humiliated. And
Yeah.
it's really quite like sad when you think about it, but it's so anxious to watch, because you're like,
Yeah.
you don't know what's like. Every time I see this scene, I'm like, they're all gonna pull out knives and just gank his ass, and there's gonna be no way out of
Yeah.
it. There's no escape, and like
Yeah.
that's the terrifying thing to me, is like when you're all alone and you're in a place you're not supposed to be, and everyone knows that, and they're just letting you like kind of wander around, and they're like,
Yeah.
all right, enough's enough, right? Like that shit. It's like, what do? Like if you're there's
Yeah.
no way out, really. Like the only way he gets out of this is because, like, again, sheer dumb luck that this woman he talked to for like 5 minutes, you know, again, like the this guy, like a woman, sacrifices herself for him essentially
Yeah.
for no reason, and you're like, he doesn't really deserve it. He doesn't really deserve to make it out of here. There's no point where
Yeah.
he like makes it so like, oh yeah, like I, like the you realize like there is no safety, there's no true guarantee in this cinematic
Mm.
universe, right?
Yeah.
There's no space for safety, no true safety. Everything is compromised, everything is delegitimized, and that's true terror, right? Where again, it feels like the rules of existence could just collapse at any moment.
Mm. Yeah, I feel like when I first saw this, I mean, there was a kind of naive part of me that just felt like the idea of a secret society was a bit of a kind of bluff, that it was, like there's when you read
It's like
about
people
all
dressing
this
up in
stuff.
costumes, it's dumb, you know what I mean? Like it's like
Yeah,
frat
I
boy
think
stuff.
that's where I came to it. But now I think that the sex trafficking element had never occurred to me until recently. I guess there is a public consciousness element of that. I mean, it's always been a thing, but in recent years it's become like apparent that these things happen among the rich and powerful like fairly ubiquitously, and that people of a certain amount of influence, like you say, they come to a certain rung where they're they're so overextended in their reach and influence that like where do they take it from there, and there is an element of like
Well, yeah, it's like,
exploitation.
what do the Elon Musks of the world do with all their
Yeah.
dumb money that they didn't really
Yeah.
deserve? Oh, they buy
Yeah.
like a big famous website, right? Like that's
Yeah.
that's what happens, right? It's just, you're just bored and you're like, well, I don't really have any worth in this world other than my economic status, so I might as well use
Yeah.
that to, test the limits of my character, quote unquote. Like, you know,
Mm.
and it's just like, I mean, to me, it's the most deeply sinister thing.
Yeah.
Like like the idea that like that costume shop in a way is like kind of a node in this network that leads up
Mm.
to a place like this. Like that to me is like it's it's like the conspiracy that's not a conspiracy. Like it's like at what point is it just the conspiracy just that rich and powerful people do fucked up shit, which is just like
Yeah,
where you're like, oh, you know what, that's just true. There's no way getting
yeah.
around that, and it's just baked into your everyday reality. And like what was it like in like Deus Ex, right? It's like that's true terror. Terror built into the system.
I feel like this, what there's this kind of inference that yeah, I think I may be reading into this too much just because this was all filmed in England, but the kind of building that they're in England is like they're kind of houses you can go on a day outing and just look around, and they have some kind of, sort of pale historical significance, and it's just a kind of, local tourist thing. And there's something about, you go into a costume shop, and obviously the costume shop in this film doesn't feel like a real costume shop. Like I don't believe
Well, first of
the
all,
kind
like
of
it's open at midnight,
yeah,
so
and
I
there's
don't
like a
know.
costume shop like slumming it on a basement level that has corridors of
It's like a
costumes that you
costume
can walk.
shop from like Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines or
Yeah,
something. You walk in and you're
yeah,
like, all right, what's going on here? Is this like is this a real space that real people live in,
yeah,
or is this kind of like a movie set with it? Well, yeah, which is
yeah.
the whole conceit of the movie, I suppose. But
And they never show him leaving either. That's the way. Like they, I've never noticed that before. They just
oh
cut from him
yeah,
being completely surrounded in this kind of claustrophobic kind of thing, like
and
you're
he's just
saying. Like
out.
it's so terrifying to think that these people are kind of surrounding him. I mean, there is a primal thing there, being kind of surrounded by
Well, not only that,
people.
but you can't see any part of them. They're all
Yeah,
robed, and you can't see their faces. Like
completely
there's
anonymous.
it's like being surrounded by a bunch of owls, or like it's like a flock of birds.
Yeah,
There's a deathly inanimacy to the whole thing.
yeah. And then he's just back in his house, and it's that kind of
It's
awakening
back in his
feeling.
house, and it's the holiday season. Like there's a cursed, corrupted normality to it, and
Yeah,
it's like nothing is ever the same now because
yeah,
he's
exactly.
bringing the haunted quality home with him.
I wonder, and maybe again, I might be bringing this up too soon, but later you see he is, I think Nicole Kidman's asleep on the bed, and he comes in, and the mask is lying next to her, and there's a kind of small thread of people who suppose that he puts it there, and there's another part.
Oh,
Is it this
really?
scene? I think it's this scene actually. I may. Oh no, it's. I think it's a bit later. Is the mask is
No, it's later because he starts investigating shit, and
yeah,
that's when they're
yeah.
like,
Like
back the fuck off.
yeah, they put the mask in there, and there's some kind of suspicion that he is actually, there's kind of two Bill Harfords, and there's this sort of other existence that has kind of branched off from that moment in the house, and there's,
Oh,
there's a whole bunch of
so
reading.
the idea that like they induct him in or
Yeah,
something, or
yeah.
interesting,
I mean, it's a
interesting.
bit of a
Yeah,
reach, but it's a kind of an interesting sort of paradigm to suppose that your desire leads you somewhere that creates a kind of super ego or alter ego, a separate kind of a separation from yourself.
yeah. I'm always suspicious of those fucking like pseudo psychoanalytic readings of movies, but
Yeah, yeah.
it's not a
It's a
terrible
reach for
idea.
sure. I mean, I think a very base reading is that, it's about. I think this is again the great Kubrick films are about following a kind of desire, like a sort of internal exploration. But then again, watching it now, there is so much kind of socio political stuff going on. The
What's that
relationship.
combined with like what are the contours of your personality when
Yeah,
they have to interface with an outside world that you know will rebuff or accept what your persona is, and what happens when
yeah,
those things come into conflict, and you know can you integrate with that larger view, and can you
mm,
identify with it fully? And I mean, this is what like Clockwork Orange is all about, right? Is that whether or
yeah,
not he can subsume himself into the great kind of repressive future.
Mm. I don't know why, like, I've always really enjoyed Clockwork Orange, but something about it is just a little bit, falls just a little bit shy of, like, really loving it the same way I do this film or Barry Lyndon. And I can't quite put my finger on what it is. Like, something about the pace doesn't work as well. Like, the pace in this, even though this film is almost like, this must be half an hour longer than Clockwork Orange, but this feels just so right. Like, I feel properly absorbed in um, what's going on here in
Yeah,
a
well,
way I
there's
don't
never
feel.
any like, there's never any orgasmic explosion in this.
Yeah,
So it's just
and I'm
build and
being
build and build and
strung
build and
along.
build. And so,
Yeah,
but like Clockwork Orange does have several of those, like, all right, we're gonna show you the goods, and like here's this,
yeah,
like, like you do get that.
super violence. I guess that's it, isn't it? I'm just sort of being strung along for the whole time. It's a shame. I was reading about that they were gonna create this dream sequence that she has for real. Um, some of the concept art looks fucking mad. Like, it was supposed to be this sort of gigantic hill with like hundreds of people having this massive orgy, and then just
Holy
this
shit.
like great lighting, and she was going to be at the top, and I just that would have been an amazing image, but sounded incredibly expensive, and I'm not surprised that they left it out.
Yeah, well, I think I think Kubrick's smart in knowing that like suggestion can work just as much as just being explicit about anything. And because we
Mm,
never really get access to her interiority, there is something eerie about it that you're not quite sure whether or not to like trust what she's saying or not. In the way that
yeah.
like Bill is somewhat more open to us in a pathetic way, but she's like this in almost like a femme fatale. Like you're not sure is like is she trustworthy? Is she like entirely innocent in what's going on? Like what's there's a quality there that is uncertain.
Mm. I guess it plays with the idea that you're not really, you can't ever be 100% certain of what someone that you're intimately involved in is, how they are, like the feelings they're having, sensations, whatever they're going through, or just the thought process. I mean, again, there is a reading of this that she is involved with the cult in some way, and that there is a kind of acceptance on her part of like being with someone who is that naive, and it's about growing to accept your naivete about the world around you, and she's kind of part of that. um,
Yeah, well, I mean, this is like a classic thing though, is that the like a man in a film coming to reckon with the unknowability and the incomprehensibility of female desire, and
mm,
that whole thing being extrapolated into almost a metaphysical realm of the universe as this woman who is opaque and oblique and just will not give you access to any kind of sense of order or rhyme or reason. And like there's a whole bunch that could go into that, but like I think this film is definitely playing into that realm of storytelling.
do you think there's like a religious reading, like a kind of, I don't know, a sort of
Oh God.
conservative element that is playing in here? Like, there's,
Well,
it's a very
oh
waspy kind of
well,
thing.
I know, I think Kubrick's making fun of that shit. I think like
Yeah,
because like I think he's very much like not a part of that milieu, so I don't think he has any question of like trying to pay homage to it or whatever. When you first said
yeah.
religious, I thought you meant like in terms of faith.
No,
And
more just in terms of like there is a, arguably these are there's a kind of very waspy conservative element to like Bill, and that there's a kind of paganistic element to the orgy, and there's a kind of repression, like a sexual repression, and I mean I think it's, maybe it is just too obvious a reading to take those elements, but I would be surprised if there hadn't been some, on Kubrick's part, some kind of like playing into that, or whether that is just by nature of like society as it is organized, that these questions would come up when discussing kind of the politics of sex and the politics of desire and kind of repression and desire. I think those all tie into very kind of pious frames of mind.
Well, it's this
Maybe.
idea that, the idea that like Christianity opens up, uh, salvation and redemption
Mm,
to the masses and everything. The inherent hypocrisy of what that has actually led to, I think, is something that has a long reach in all forms of art, and like this is definitely leaning on that kind of structure. Uh, yeah, the religious aspect of Kubrick, I think, is like kind of, yeah, not super clear to me, if I'm being frank. Like it's
mm,
he seems to me kind of basically like an atheist in a lot of
mm,
ways, which I mean, okay, maybe I'm wrong because I'm not super well read in his biography or whatever. I don't know what
mm,
his personal faith was, but he definitely comes across to me as a very materialistic guy who's much more
mm-hmm,
interested in the internal psychology of a person rather than, I don't know, any outside relation with an authentic sense of spirit or otherness, or
mm,
there's like aspects of 2001 that can be read in that way,
mm-hmm,
but 2001 is also like a very sardonic, skeptical view of human inspiration and progress, and like
yeah,
the idea that like violence is inextricable from technological development and all this shit.
mm,
There's an aspect to that that I think is like somewhat lampooning the kind of like the 60s optimistic, everything is coming up Millhouse,
mm,
the Whig history kind of interpretation of reality that America had absorbed during that time in the post-war years. I think
mm,
I think he likes the idea of poking holes in that.
yeah,
I mean, you see that in Full Metal Jacket too, and
yeah,
he even does this with like the idea of aristocracy and propriety in Barry Lyndon, where he says like, yeah, this is all bullshit. All these guys were idiots. They none of them did anything to deserve their titles or whatever. It was all a meaningless exchange of land and wealth from people who never deserved it in the first place.
yeah. I mean, it's interesting that I was reading about Aryan Papers, which is the Holocaust film that he worked on for quite a long time. That he didn't end up making because Schindler's List got made, and he felt that. I mean, what he said is that the story was told, but he was obviously Jewish. I think he had Jewish mother and Jewish father, but had no at least externally, never expressed an interest in Judaism or
Well, it's
kind of.
like culturally, but not like in terms of
Yeah,
religious faith.
yeah. He's like, I think you're absolutely right. Is that his interests were not um kind of explicitly spiritual by any kind of dogmatic rationale, but I do think about Aryan Papers and whether I think ultimately he stepped away from it because it's such a harrowing thing to deal with. But I wonder whether, obviously Steven Spielberg, it was Schindler's List was about reconnecting with Judaism and something which he had kind of not renounced but had to
Well,
kind of
he
put
had
away
like,
from himself.
yeah, he had in a way almost he had played the game of like
Yeah,
in terms of like the Hollywood space, and it was kind of like him basically being like, oh no, like actually I've been kind of repressing this and I don't even know it, at least from what I
yeah.
understand.
Mm. Um, but I think any kind of religious reading is not. I mean, you can read these things in so much of 20th century cinema, just like the nature of the context in which certain films are allowed to exist, the idea of censorship and where that kind of spurns from. And um, yeah, but it's interesting specifically here because it is, first of all, such an explicit film about kind of repression and desire and breaking three of those things, and it uses very kind of religious imagery. The idea of groups of people together, the idea of kind of ritual.
I would not even say religious as much as esoteric, right? I think it
Yeah.
plays more on the idea of masonry and
Yes. Sure.
like society is like the golden dawn and shit like that, like the
Yeah.
the notion of the hidden, order. Because it's like actually when you look at where they're at in that mansion, there's a
Mm.
distinct lack of like iconography that gets noticed.
Yeah, that's
It
very
is
true.
that is not the focus. The focus is much more on the kind of the bareness of the people and the actions that are taking place in the space rather than any kind
Mm.
of like the ceremony is a ceremony of bodies. It is not a ceremony oriented around worship, really.
Yeah,
It is almost like a dance or like a bit of choreography.
yeah. I love the like Alan Cumming in this
Oh, he's
scene.
so good.
I love how he's like leaning across the desk. Like that positioning is so feels so deliberate. Like, and if you think
Yeah.
about how
Can I say
much he would have
it,
probably,
it almost
mm,
almost feels like he's like coming on to Cruise a little bit. Like
yeah,
he's very
definitely,
forward.
yeah, yeah. This is kind of what I was trying to get at with the costume shop scene. The first costume shop scene is there is something to be
Oh,
said
look at
about,
this. Look at this though. You see the costume shop again, but
yeah,
it's daylight. It's not the fake space anymore. You know what I mean?
yeah,
Like this is it's almost like the nocturnal space is where the artifice comes in. It's like an other world emerges that's all
yeah,
fake and phony. But then when it's daylight, it's like, oh, now we're actually in New York City or like London, whatever that approximation is. But like it almost like emerges as being something. Oh, now we're in the rationalistic daylight hours where um like he's searching for the truth and there's some quest for that as opposed to the nocturnal journey that he was on before.
yeah. I guess it's never occurred to me before, but knowing that none of this was filmed in New York and all of it was filmed in London, I guess they would have just had to do like a back lot, like the old school kind of, like Blade Runner style, like build something outdoors, like build a street outdoors as opposed to in like a studio. Because,
Yeah, that's what they did on Streets of Fires. They just basically put like a giant black huge tarp over the entire thing to make it look
yeah,
darker.
thing I always loved about Streets of Fire, and again, I think it goes back to that very specific attachment to constructed sets and kind of backdrops, is that Streets of Fire doesn't really feel like a real city. Like it feels like an impression someone would get. Like, I mean, Streets of Fire is a
It's a
musical.
postcard of the
Yeah,
urban noir backdrop.
yeah.
It's the
It's
memory you would have of it as a teenager. It's very romantic. Everything's
yeah,
covered in rain and neon, and like like Walter Hill was very much going for a, like I would almost say like like kind of a pseudo MTV style where everything's again
yeah,
all the smoke and all the rain and um almost the idea of like the city as like a three-dimensional sealed box that contains everything it needs in itself and there's no outside
yeah,
context to give it there's nothing outside the city, like the same thing with
yeah,
Gotham, right? The idea is just like this endless metropolis that goes on and on and on. There's just nothing but skyscrapers and gargoyles and
mm,
fucking rooftops that are covered in like garbage and shit. Like
yeah,
it's Blade Runner has that too. Like it's so it's like we've never been outside the city. It's always been
yeah.
contained in here, and
Or the city is all consuming. You never
yeah,
leave the
it's
city.
like a monster. It's a labyrinth. I mean, it's
Yeah,
the post, it's the metropolis kind of thing where you look at parts of that movie, and it seems like, oh man, this like the depths of this like crazy city in the future just go on for miles and miles, and
mm,
there's like you imagine if you hit the bottom, you would hit the Earth's core.
yeah. There's I feel like the jazz club that he goes to is the same, has the same kind of, it doesn't feel like a real, I mean it's conceivably a real place, but it feels like an impression of a place, like when you're young and you don't really understand the functionality of buildings, for example, or interior spaces. There's this kind of, and you see that kind of thing in film, there's a kind of hermetic quality, like it's just all kind of sealed into itself. Like I don't know, it's difficult to describe, but it's like again, I think just ties into everything that's going on in this film, is it's not a real thing, it's an
Well, it's like you
impression of a
entered
thing.
into a picture. It's you entered into a
Yeah,
space of a painting that has now been rendered in a three-dimensional fashion, but
yeah,
then
yeah.
also refashioned into a two-dimensional strip of film, right? So
Mm.
it's
I think
yeah,
like
like
Stanley
Dick
Kubrick.
Tracy is also one of these movies that did that in the
Oh,
'90s.
right.
Like there's so many
Yeah,
of these though. Like and The Crow, obviously, there's a heritage of like the comic book, pop art, graphic novel aspect to
yeah,
this, and like basically the only person who really bothers with this kind of aesthetic nowadays is Zack Snyder, and he does it with a
yeah.
much more like left to right, um like he really wants that shit to be like you could post that as your desktop wallpaper. That's what he wants.
Sure.
It's not quite this, but there's a heritage there of um portraying things and like using the just like the sheer weight of the frame to give something an iconography, and you're not like trying to really depict a space where people live and
Mm.
breathe, but almost like a space where like characters exist, and like the character's almost a part of the brickwork.
Yeah, I really miss that. I think there's so much in just kind of big budget cinema, which is to location, or if not location,
One
it's
location
to
or anonymous green screen.
yeah,
So
and
so
it
this
just
bit again, like
nothing.
where he's behind the bars,
Yeah,
like
this dude scares the
he's
shit out of
he's
me.
he's dwarfed by them. Oh yeah, this shit. Well, what's
This guy.
terrifying about this scene is that it's in like bright daylight. Like there's
Yeah,
green around it. Like
yeah,
you immediately feel like, okay, like at least when it was dark, you could conceivably think of it as like oh, it's the gothic realm of nocturnal despair. Where now we're in the normality of everything. Like that's what I'm talking about. It's like you enter into this, not even the daylight is safe. Now you realize,
yeah.
oh no, like there's
Permeable.
nothing outside of this.
Yeah. You know, they say that you can never dream about a face that you haven't seen in real life. Well, I feel like a nightmare is you only dream about faces that you would never see in real life, and that's what that dude is. That dude is like not a real
Oh
person.
yeah, dude, that
It's
guy
it
looks
is
like the fucking crypt keeper.
yeah.
I don't know where
Like
Kubrick found these dudes. He must have like dug under a rock and was like,
yeah,
you know, running his hands through the millipedes and the salamanders, and he found that dude sitting there.
yeah. But you know he's got like he must have looked at everybody just to get that one guy. He's like
Yeah,
that would have to
thousands
be
of
terrible.
people in casting.
And this is terrifying because they have this message printed up already, like ready, like
Yeah,
they know he's
yeah.
gonna come. You know,
Like the
it's like
secretary did
oh,
it. Like it's
yeah,
just come on.
like she's doing a bunch that day for anyone who's coming back to yeah,
Yeah, but see that this use of the bars is so like it's just like you really feel like he's being hemmed in by
yeah.
like there's just no way of him like having a possibility other than what's being presented in front of him.
Bars, like in film, it's such a great device if you use it properly. Like you were talking about Bresson earlier, I feel like Bresson is like the perfect guy for using um just that restrictive like overlay of bars. Like what's the film? I think it's Pickpocket. It's the one that Paul Schrader has is particularly
Liberally
infatuated with.
borrows from, let's say it that
Yeah,
way.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, it's that one. Yeah,
um, and
I also
that's
think
a
of the Pardon Manhunter,
uh-huh. Oh yeah,
where
of course, yeah,
it's Will Graham and Hannibal Lecter, and like over the course of the scene, like one character goes from being behind bars to the other one, and it's such a
mm,
subtle way of editing that you don't even notice it until like someone
yeah,
points it out to you. Like that kind of stuff, like it doesn't take a genius to figure this stuff out, but it does take a genius to kind of put it together in an effective way that like
yeah.
resonates with you emotionally.
I mean, like you could easily have for that scene some kind of like he goes up to the door and it's a kind of Wizard of Oz situation where a face appears like in a sort of porthole and brings
Dude,
that sort
the
of message through.
paintings in this house are so fucking weird. Like,
Yeah,
okay, like if you look at the paintings, there's something like they have like these like topographical like top to bottom layers. If you see what I mean,
yeah,
like it's almost
yeah,
like a Renaissance painting where they want to portray how the spheres of heaven look, right? So
yeah,
there's variegated layers where it's like here's the seventh heaven and here's the sixth heaven. Like
Yeah.
there's something going on. Like I would kill for like a high res picture of one of these paintings.
I mean,
Oh, dude,
surely it could
this
be
zoom in,
screen grab.
dude, we never get this now. We When was the last time you saw a contemporary movie with these like push and zooms on
Yeah.
someone's face? You never see that now. It's so out of fashion, but it's great.
These these are the things that I just feel like people making films now, there is you just feel like there's no reason you should be phoning it in this much. Like move the camera. Like nobody really moves the camera. There's this kind of rigidness
Yeah.
to
Well,
cinematic imagery now.
I really, really honestly blame the fuck out of TV for that because I'm sick to death
Blame
of
who,
like
sorry?
just television as a format
Oh
because
sure.
I'm
Yeah.
so sick to death of like the rote coverage of like three camera setup. Like
Yeah.
you get to see them together, then like it's a shot reverse shot thing, and that's all
Mm.
you get. And I'm like, dude, can we please like they figured out how to stage conversations in an interesting way in the goddamn
Yeah.
1930s. All right,
Yeah.
if fucking like John Ford and Sternberg could figure this shit out, like I'm sorry, like I want people to be in the same frame. I want them to talk to each other in the same frame sometimes. Like it's okay, you know. Like I don't like when that kind of stuff gets reduced to like everything has to function this way.
Mm.
I don't know. It's mind numbing to me. It really is so banal and
Yeah.
Kubrick never does that in any part of this movie, and he's constantly shaking things up and like cutting between various instances and different cameras of like what someone's reaction is, and like he's
Yeah.
not like this is not a formulaic way of telling this story. He's very
Mm.
specific in each quality that gets represented, and you just feel like again, there's no excuse to do anything less. You know, it doesn't have to be this style, but it has to be something, right? You have to have something to grab onto. And
Well, it's yeah.
oh, go ahead.
Sorry, I was just going to say we were talking, I think, before about just the difficulty of shot reverse shot and just filming conversations and why. And I think it's glaringly like just it speaks to again to how Kubrick's obsession always comes back to like everything has to be worked in. So like as a very visually minded kind of filmmaker, not necessarily just strictly photographically, but design wise and kind of editing and spaces and presentation and all these kind of things, to then be reduced to a film which is essentially 80% people having discussions. Like there's not a kind of there's not Clockwork Orange or like Full Metal Jacket level of action that has to be kind of worked out. It's discussions. A lot of this, like the bar scene, is a shot reverse shot, but you don't feel as though you're being reduced by that the way you do kind
Well,
of lazy shot
it's
reverse shot.
never the same though. Like when you watch that scene, it's he's not cutting back and forth between the same thing. You know, like
Yeah,
that when it's that kind of shit, I have no tolerance for that. But
sure.
like in that scene is like some of it is like extreme close up, and then sometimes he'll cut away from that extreme close up into something that's a bit more off kilter, and like
Yeah,
it's not like it's not extremely obvious, but he does do that kind of stuff, and
yeah,
it's like that's dedication, right? That's being like, all right, no, this is exactly what we need for this line of dialogue, right?
yeah.
He's not again, it's not handled in a way that's routine and mundane. So I
Mm,
want to point out in this scene, though
mm.
this entire movie, like Cruz is just like his character is the only way he feels like he can get anything is by bribing people, right?
Yeah,
It's like he's got to toss around his
flashing his
money
badge. Yeah,
left and right. He's got to like bring like this gift. You know, it's such a hokey, stupid, yuppie idea of like the only way that I'll get you to talk to me is if I fucking like bribe your ass. It's like a
yeah,
real like scumbag. You know what I mean? Like just like a real gross way of interacting with people. And like in that part earlier with the cab where he's like he tears up the $100 bill or whatever. It's so
yeah,
garish. It's like really
yeah.
it
Such
fucking pisses
power
me
move.
off.
Yeah. But again, I guess again, I think there is this relationship in this film that's explored between sex and money, not just simply in the sense that someone like him can go out and pay for sex, or anyone can go
Well,
and
like
pay for
every
sex.
relationship he has feels transactional in a way.
Yeah, it's like you don't just buy sex, but you kind of money and affection has a kind of, you can buy like Valentine's gifts, or you can just buy things for you and a partner to do, and there is a sexual aspect to money, like you can
But the
afford to
one
do it
thing
for
he can't buy
present.
his way into is the big boys club.
Yeah, exactly. The Big Boys Club is like a sexual realm beyond it's a realm beyond understanding, it's like um the way someone, if like different side of the sexual spectrum will never have experiences, and they can't buy their way into that, they can't afford themselves, they can't kind of you can't sort of
There's a hard limit
class
there that
them.
cannot be
Yeah,
breached.
like and it kind of explores where kind of sexual desire exists, for two people, for one, or from one person to the next, it's like kind of inextricable from who they are, and you can't and but there's always a curiosity about those two different things, like what a kind of what am I missing question that's always present in sort of sexual politics. See, this is a really interesting staging of a conversation, because it is a very dramatic turn from him being kind of a bit slimy with this woman, and then having to sort of process this revelation that the woman he could have slept
What?
with, he
Yeah.
could have
What?
caught
And
AIDS
it's
with
like
her
he the reaction is played where you see his face,
the whole time.
and
Yeah,
he's played back. He's like leaning like back in the scene, and she's
yeah,
kind of like much more in front, and you see like the full reaction of her telling him that, but without seeing her face really.
yeah,
And like that kind of stuff, like yeah, it's just it's very interesting, and it makes him feel small and kind of again, even when he's in this apartment where he should supposedly be the kind of like the rich guy, who's like swinging his dick around. He can't even do that because it's like, oh, I might, you know, fucking like HIV, which is another like maybe this is a bit like of a thin thread, but like the like where he gets like pushed around and get called gay earlier. I
mm,
think there's something linking that to this,
yeah,
where it's this idea that like the dissolution of the white heterosexual marriage
mm,
just like leads into a full like free fall, right? Where like suddenly anything is possible now, and
yeah,
even like the interactions with sex workers now, that becomes like and this is also like a big thing in so many 90s movies where they constantly talk about like it's like, oh, sex isn't safe anymore, and this idea of
yeah,
like the quote unquote homosexual disease
yeah,
of AIDS. Like now it's like, oh, now it enters into the realm of straightness and straight relationships, and that like that's also a bit an American Psycho too, like this like
mm,
anxiety over that, and it it's like this like hangover of these Reagan years where it was just denied, denied, denied for so many years while
yeah,
people died, and now it's like the chickens have come home to roost, and like Bill Hartford he's not only morally compromised and emotionally compromised, but like potentially physically. And
yeah,
yeah, oh my god, okay, can I tell you this scene where he's
mm,
getting stalked?
yeah.
I have had so many experiences like this just
Oh,
walking alone
really?
at night, because like I work nights, and so I'm often like just up during the middle of the night walking around. Oh my god, like I have had the sensation of being stalked, and like I've like
Wow.
seen things, man. it oh it like really, especially this guy in like the trench coat, right? Like this is almost like a
Yeah,
scene out of like a 1940s noir film, right? Where
yeah.
like a guy's just
I don't
getting
want to.
stalked across these streets.
I don't want to single out bald people, but something about the baldness of these sinister figures is like creating a lack of physical identity. Like
What's
just
it's like they're
something very anonymous. Like it's a presence rather than
yeah,
like an individual. Like
well,
it's a
it's
very
like a
clever.
uniformity of character, right?
Yeah, exactly
There's
that.
like a
Yeah,
there's an interesting sense in which It's like, did they grow all these guys in a vat together?
Yeah. And like that shot a few moments ago is, like this shot, he's kind of far enough away, but you can see what he looks at, and he's just so boring looking, and it's like the
Well, no, I mean,
scariest thing.
no, it's like what's so good is that you can see him, but you can't really see the details of his face. You
I
can't see
love
his
Lucky to Be
reaction.
Alive on that newspaper as well.
I know, I know that
That's a
that
real
I know.
tongue-in-cheek touch.
I mean, the thing is, people say Kubrick like is like self-serious. I'm like, nah, man, he's so funny. Like
He's
he's
so
funny as
funny.
shit.
Barry
Like
Lyndon is hilarious. Like
Barry
Barry
Lyndon is
Lyndon is such a
hilarious.
funny.
There's a lot of funny parts of The Shining. Like
Yeah.
there's always humor in his stuff, even if it
Oh,
is
big
like
time.
very
Yeah.
dark humor. See this?
Yeah.
Oh my god, like this scares the fucking hell out of me. Like
Yeah.
it really, because it's such a it could happen. Like that could happen to you, and you wouldn't
Yeah.
understand why, and you would just feel totally lost and disempowered, and you're like, what is going on? It's just your reality zone is discombobulated.
I think about films like growing up, sort of late 90s, early 2000s, stuff that wasn't scary, not even very good, and I can't think of specific films, but that had this kind of. I think that the one that sticks out that just really unsettled me, and I couldn't attest whether it was a quality film. Do you remember that film, The Mothman Prophecies, with Richard Gere? And
Okay, can I tell you?
yeah,
I knew you were going to say that shit. I knew.
really, oh,
I
that's
knew you were
really
going to say that shit before you said it
good.
because
I
I
don't
was
think,
going to say in
yeah,
response. No, can I tell you?
sure.
I am obsessed with the book that was based on. One of the most
Oh,
important books
really?
in my life. I read that book when I was a kid. It changed my life.
Oh,
It's
okay.
it's
I'm gonna
it's
have
an
to check
incredible
that out.
book. Cannot recommend it enough. But yes, I love the movie too. The movie's great. And
Yeah,
I've been
but
thinking
there
about
is
rewatching it recently because it's also like kind of stealthily a Christmas movie in a weird way.
right, right. I've got to check it out. But it really, really like it wasn't just scary. Like the first time you see like The Shining is scary and it's a horror film, and it's an intense physical and mental ordeal that it puts you through. But the Mothman Prophecies, I just have this memory of it just feeling so ordinary in a way. Like, and I grew up in an area. I didn't grow up in. It's a very kind of like northwestern America kind of vibe in Mothman Prophecies, or is it like Alaskan, somewhere kind of like that?
No, it's yeah, it's like in around like Virginia, like kind
Right.
of like West Virginia, that place.
Yeah. So, but I grew up in kind of like a countryside which looked similar to that. So it was just a feeling. It was just all a bit too close to home. Like,
Hmm. Hmm.
it wasn't that constructed environment. It was kind of very normal looking
It was a place
locations.
where people lived.
Yeah, and I remember just the feeling of that film, and there are moments in that film where it just
When he gets
that
the phone
very
call.
yeah, that very convincing reality just becomes completely ripped through. And I think that type of thing is what you describing this film made me think of. Um, and yeah,
No,
it's
honestly, 100% same exact energy. And you know
yeah,
what it is? I can exactly describe to you what it is.
yeah,
It's the sense, like I've alluded to it like a little bit before, but the idea that there is an assumed layer of normality, and that there is an additional layer which is not,
yeah,
you couldn't put your finger on it and describe it as something that's non-normal, because your subjectivity is rendered in an objective way
yeah,
when it shouldn't be, right?
mm,
So like Bill Harford's paranoia and his insecurities and his own internal doubts become manifested. Like when that mask gets on her, like the bed,
yeah,
like it's his inner subjective world that he thought that he had, you know, kept entirely internally separate from his family life,
yeah,
has now breached this other side, and now
yeah,
it is like fully manifested, and it's
yeah,
the permeable nature of our selfhood with
yeah,
what we consider, the kind of idea of like the consensus reality that everyone exists in, and that's hard physical matter. It's that, his like his own like psychological turmoil, then it becomes realer than real. Now it's like a material fact. And like Mothman Prophecies also has that where it suddenly goes from like, the paranormal in that film. What's genius about it is that it's not rendered in like kind of kitschy like monster movie qualities. It's stuff that like could conceivably happen and is
Yeah.
totally inexplicable, and is where your mind's your consciousness then like it goes outside of just being your own little private world, and it becomes, no, now we're in the real world, and now like
Mm.
there's just no way to control
Yeah.
the the idea that like you could keep them separate. There's like they're become fully identical with each other, and like that
Yeah.
is, I think, in talking about this, I think that is like ultimately what really scares the shit out of me about this movie, is that it's the idea that like his awakening is an awakening to his realization that he is entirely culpable
Yeah.
in whatever's going on, but he has no control over it. There's
Yeah.
nothing he can
Completely.
do. Even if he
Mm.
had some, if he had an objection to it, it is entirely futile. And
Mm.
so there's just like nothing that he can do. And there's a bit in this that I want to point out later, which is like
Mm.
maybe one of the most like terrifying, like gut wrenching scenes I've ever seen in a movie that a friend pointed out to me.
Right.
And like I want to ask what you think about it, but we'll get to that in a bit. But
Okay.
yeah, like for what I just said, like do you feel like that makes a little bit of sense?
100%. 100%. What it reminds me, and you'll probably know this, there's a philosophical concept of kind of words and not ideas, like more objective things that we use being inextricable from like reality. I can't remember the name of the concept, but like I'm gonna have to look this up, otherwise it's gonna plague
Are you
me.
talking about logocentrism?
Yes, that's the word. Yes, the idea that yeah, it's like the certain materials that we create are actually not are kind of
That
just a
reality has a
representation.
linguistic, symbolic character to
Yeah,
it.
I can't remember who it is who's kind of behind that. Which philosopher is?
Well, it's less of like someone like saying that, and it's more of just a general attitude that has been recognized.
Right.
It's like it's a religious attitude, it's a mystic attitude, it's
Mm,
um, a paranoid like attitude, and in some respects even like a scientific attitude, right? When you consider like, you know mathematics as a language, right? If we
yeah.
think that reality abides by this set of quantifications and qualifications, then like is that much the same as like saying that it's described by the Holy Trinity and the Kabbalah, or this series of chants and affirmations from the Buddha? Like, you know what I mean? Like it's not too far away from these sets of principles where is like, can reality be described, and if it
Yeah.
can, like what are those descriptions? And
Mm,
um it's like, and that's kind of opposed to more of a I suppose a resolute refusal to like say that reality can be quantified, which is like more of like a solipsistic, like adjacent to nihilistic attitude. But yeah, go on.
mm. Well, in only as much as that kind of vibe runs throughout this film is that there is a solipsistic attitude in Bill that feels like reality is a thing I can understand and possess in the same way that my wife is a person I can understand. Like that whole scene at the beginning where they're kind of high is like essentially him saying, "You are something I understand," like quite literally saying, "I understand you." And then that essentially just unraveling over like Kubrick using these kind of scenarios, like growing from just something that is kind of surprising, like the costume shop, to something that is like utterly soul destroyingly like terrifying, like the orgy scene, just as a way of dismantling a kind of objective reality as he understands it. And then from there, it becomes, as you say, like a reality that you have like subjectively manifested like outward of your own being through your actions. I guess that's a bit of a sketchy sort of philosophical take. But yeah, that's
Well,
kind
no,
of
I mean it's. I mean this film is about speculation as an art, right? It's like what did or didn't happen, what did or did I not see. I mean, this whole scene with Sidney
mm,
Pollack right here, it it is fucking terrifying because
yeah,
you have no idea what he's really saying. Because on one hand, he's like basically gaslighting Cruz. He's basically
yeah,
saying, "Oh, okay, there's a problem. There's a real problem. Something happened." But then he's trying to say like, "But what if it
you
was
got
all
it all wrong.
manufactured for you?"
Yeah,
Right? And
yeah,
this idea, I mean, this is like a very like a crypto gnostic like very. I mean, if you start thinking like this, like I mean, it is like the ultimate paranoid rabbit hole where like like imagine if you went to that kind of place and if Sidney Pollack was right, where that whole thing was staged
mm,
for like Cruz's benefit to communicate to him something, right? Like that is like the ultimate, like again, talk about solipsism, right? Like it's you get to the point where you're like, am I it's like main character syndrome, right? Where
yeah,
does everything exist only for me? Like that
yeah,
that kind of stuff, if you it's I mean that's the really disturbing part about this scene is that he almost gets like pseudo confirmation that like am I literally insane or is reality oriented around me?
yeah,
And there's a part like a metatextual aspect to like, well, the film is oriented around him. It is
mm,
like there's no like the artistic project of this movie is an exploration of Bill Hartford and his journey. And so if you engage with that, it's like, well, I mean, yes, on one hand, Sidney Pollack is telling the truth, like all this stuff is staged, right?
mm,
But within the film's text, if Cruz believes that in this scene, like you basically have to doubt everything because then everything is
yeah,
suspect because then everything
mm,
seems to be fake. It seems to be a construction and seems to be like like everything is as fake as that New York City set is, right?
yeah,
And either and that's the problem. It's either all that was real and it all meant something, or it was all fake, but it was fake for a reason, right? So either
it was
way,
staged. Yeah,
you're overwhelmed with meaning, and suddenly reality
yeah,
explodes into a meaningful, like quasi animistic universe where you're there's a tyranny and there's a crushing weight
mm,
of meaning and purpose that you cannot fathom because it is just simply beyond you and because it is not being made explicable to you. And
yeah,
like I mean, it's a superbly crafted scene because you can tell like Bill Hartford just does he doesn't want to hear it. Like he wants to run away. He's like what are you telling me? And like he's being
yeah.
fucked with so hard. Because on one hand
It's in,
he's
yeah.
like, oh yeah, oh yeah, you saw something, but did you though? It's like, well, what the fuck is it then? Like it's maddening.
You see, I'd always read this scene as being a kind of, I mean, in a very, very sinister way, like a placation of every kind of revelation that Tom Cruise has had. Like he's saying, Nick Nightingale was bruised, and Sidney Pollack is like, yeah, well, they knocked him about a bit. They were a bit mad, but then they just put him on a plane, and now he's gone home. And then he's like, what about the prostitute? And she's dead. This woman has died. He's like, well, she just did too much coke. It's it was going to happen. Like, I guess I'd never seen, but like, and I think that's for me where the terror had come from, and he plays it so kind of straight. But obviously, what you're saying is that he's reaching like much further than that. Like it's going sort of
Well,
into
he's using the implausibility of what he's saying against Cruz. He's saying you have to believe the bullshit that I'm telling you or the truth
yeah,
that I'm telling you. Like either
yeah,
way, what are you gonna do otherwise?
yeah. There's
Like
nowhere else
if
to
I
go
if I
from.
give you if I give you answers, those are all the answers that you'll ever have, right?
Yeah,
Like I cannot give you anything that what I'm telling you right now. And you can either
yeah,
believe me or you can think that I'm a liar. But either way, you're buying into some kind of scenario that has been, either managed for you or that you have
yeah,
stumbled into. And here's the thing. Do you want to live in a universe that is accidental and chaotic and like a complete like void of, like just, an immoral reality where like all this stuff happens, or do you want to live in a universe where all that is fake, but you can't believe anything that you fucking experience because
Yeah.
some kind of like weird like conspiracy has been set up to like make you think that this is going on for some purpose, right? Like it's like it's an impossible question because there's no good answer. It's like a deeply, deeply existential quandary that cannot be avoided. Where you have to decide for yourself as a viewer, because ultimately, at the end of it, like Cruz just chooses to basically ignore it all and go back to his private life and just be like, all
Yeah.
right, well, I guess I'm just never going to understand what happened, and I have to live with that and the
But
horror of
it
like the everyday banality of that.
isn't the context of the scene that there is more I mean, this is essentially what you're trying to say, but I'm just trying to sort of understand is that Sidney Pollock is explaining he is essentially placating, he's telling a version of what happened, and that Tom Cruise is never going to know exactly what happened, but he knows that there is more. Like, it's not so much that Sidney Pollock is lying as much as he is omitting certain aspects of what really happened, and that Tom Cruise has to accept that there is more than that, and that's not something Sidney Pollock is addressing. Or is that essentially what you were saying anyways, that it is just there is the unknowable universe, and then there is the kind of constructed
Well,
universe?
yeah, like I mean, he literally just said like in the dialogue, he's like, "What if I told you that all that was staged?"
Yeah.
Like so. At first, he says like all these lies. Basically, he's like, "Ah, well, quote unquote lies, whatever, right? Whatever that means." He says, "Oh, what you think happened is not actually what happened, and actually, it's all mundane." Da 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 da.
Mm.
And then there's a feeling that's like, ah, he's not buying. He's not buying. He's not on the hook, right? So now I need to tell you like a third truth, right? A third version where it actually wasn't all bullshit. But
Yeah.
even if it was what you think it is, it's not real, or it's constructed, like whatever that means, right? It's like it was, it's staged.
Mm.
So suddenly, like again, you end up doubting yourself. You get gaslit. It's now
Yeah.
you're like, well, okay. So there's a couple of versions of this. Either it was all real and it was horrible, right? It's all fake and I have nothing to worry about because it's all bullshit. Or it was real and like, but it was constructed for me, which is even like worse. Or
Yeah.
it was all faked and it was all constructed for me, which
Yeah.
you're like, okay, like that's almost even like stupider. Like that like you get enter into like the Lovecraft universe where like God, like the giant primordial being at the center of the universe, is just like a blind idiot playing trumpets. And
Yeah.
like, I mean, that's the existential part that comes to like define this movie for me. Is it's like, what kind of world do you want to live in? Do you want to
Mm.
like, is there an acceptable version of the truth that will make you live a better life? Or like, do you just turn away in ignorance from all of this? Because like all the options that he presents to him here, it's like, well, what do you go with, right? It's a legitimate, like, it's a problem. Like, if
Yeah.
this was being presented to me, I'd be like, I'd lose my mind, honestly. I would be like, I don't like, what the fuck do you mean it's
Yeah.
staged, right? Like, what is that, like, fundamentally, like the idea of it being staged, all that stuff being staged for you, you got to think like, okay, like what
Yeah.
then, right? Like for like literally for what purpose? And then you become a full blown paranoiac, and there's no way to avoid it.
Yeah.
And yeah, like that's more what I mean.
Yeah. I get that. I mean, I think it's just too
Yeah, exactly. He's like
terrifying.
saying like what kind of fucking charade ends with someone ending up dead, right? Like it's,
Yeah.
and the thing is that could happen, right? That's the kind of
Yeah.
scary thing. It's like it could all be bullshit, but someone could still have been dead.
Mm. And I guess then his only recourse is he's just got to kind of go back, and he's just got to be what he's supposed to be, And that's it's kind of such a bleak ending, really. Like, when it gets to it, it's just like, well, you've you've ventured into a realm that will never kind of reveal to you any real truth or purpose. It will just send you
Wait,
back the way you
yeah,
came.
exactly. Well, it reflects his own subjectivity. There's no more boundary between himself and the outside world. He gets the answers that he wants to have.
Yeah.
And that is a really scary prospect, because that means that you have to be very careful with what kind of question you're asking,
Yeah.
because
That's
it
fucked
like
up.
it yeah, it is, isn't it? Like, it's
Yeah.
fucking scary.
Yeah. Man, this film, I really feel like that. It's hard for me not to believe that that's not a deliberate. Like thinking about this as Kubrick's last film, that in his age there must have been some level of him operating a kind of philosophical maneuver. Just trying to understand the knowable universe. And I mean, the thing is he is a person, a quote unquote, a person of influence, but someone who never, he was not a socialite, he was kind of reclusive and just sort of focused on his work. But he must have speculated about just like the limits of knowledge. If you are someone of immense power and influence, or even just a bill, then what are the limits to what you know and where you can exist in
Exactly.
what you know.
What kind of questions can you ask, and what kind of answers do you get back? I mean, like, that
Yeah,
that part at the end is so fucking evil, where he's like life goes on until it
yeah,
doesn't. But you know that,
yeah.
don't you, Bill? Like,
That's my favorite line in the whole film.
it is so evil, because again, that's the kind of like gaslighting, hyper paranoid, like, it's like, what do you think at that point? Because what
Mm,
he's saying effectively is, it's like, yeah, shit happens until it doesn't anymore.
yeah,
But you already get that. You already get this, Bill, on some level, that you don't really want the answers to this. What you really want is to feel safe, right? And that's like such a fucking cynical idea. And like, I'm not gonna say
yeah,
like I obviously agree with that, because I think you're not supposed to be on Sidney Pollock's side in that scene. I think he's like
yeah,
a very like evil character in that bit. He's just like a fucking prick. But like, it makes the film. I mean, it asks some very uncomfortable questions, and like, it forces you to reckon with this stuff in a way that is like so confrontational, and so, I think that's why this film wasn't exactly well received, because you come out of this is not like a satisfying, conventionally exciting movie. It's a fucking bummer, because
yeah.
effectively the film ends with like you basically, it's like, I mean, like, you brought up with the idea that he put the mask on the bed, right?
Mm,
We don't know. Did he? Like, you know what I mean?
yeah,
There's no like answers. There's no idea of like resolution, or even a kind of like soft questioning. It's just, oh no, like, you have to decide. Like, literally, because Bill, the character who we're supposed to follow, like, he's running away from this. So
yeah.
you, like, it's almost like a challenge to the viewer. It's, you have to have agency where he does not, and that's a powerful statement, to where
Mm.
like you're almost asking the audience members to be more competent than the main character.
One interesting thought that we touched upon with Sidney Pollock is he is just so agreeable. There's something about his face and the way he tones what he's telling Bill is that it's not kind of a screenwriter's idea of like, I have to make this argument convincing in order for it to work. It's like, it is very, the way he has a very avuncular quality that makes you kind of, kind of like a sort of wise headmaster that would sort of say these things, and you'd feel placated by what he's saying. Like there's a kind of a stronger reason at work behind what he's saying. I think that's the genius of his character, is he doesn't sort of take him into a shady room and say, listen here, boy, do not touch this which you do not understand. It's just like he can
Well,
very
he
convincingly
doesn't,
make
because
the
if he did that,
scenario
he would
seem
validate and be
acceptable.
like, he would
Yeah,
validate his paranoia and say like, yes, you're right
yeah,
to be
exactly. Yeah,
suspicious. Instead, he's like, no, you know what? Come
you got it
on,
all
Bill.
wrong.
But then he's also like, he's very aggressive, and he starts swearing and stuff. And like, so
Yeah,
again,
pointing
it's
fingers.
total gaslighting. It's like the switching of moods. It's, you have no idea what to think after the end of that conversation, because you're like, does he even believe in anything he's just said? You don't know.
Yeah,
It's a brilliant performance. I mean, oh my god, I cannot. It's just, frankly, like almost too good for words. It's just
yeah.
superb. And then this bit with him crying, and then just he's like sitting on the sofa like a forlorn child.
Yeah. I like gestures and um what's the word when you're placed in a certain way, like if you're like the way he sort of shrunk into his collar here, like I think they're so key in like Kubrick films. Again, just the power of inference, like building worlds from not just spaces and design, but like a way a character sits, or
Yeah,
and this is
from
why he does,
gestures.
like he's literally, they're like those kind of art, those wooden art dolls that you pose. He has to kind of inch the foot just ever so slightly to create. It's like Alan Cumming sort of leaning across the desk. There is a sexual energy in that scene, that he's putting in there through gestures, and like it's all these details are all kind of a piece.
Yes, absolutely. So, um, okay, I want you to watch this fucking scene at the toy store.
Okay.
Okay, I want you to watch the kid. Okay,
Yeah.
watch where that kid fucking goes. If you're watching along, you should watch that shit too. Anyway,
I feel like this is gonna give me
so
nightmares.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, just keep your eye on what happens with the kid and where the kid
Yeah.
goes. So yeah, there's a whole part of this we haven't talked about where like this movie effectively destroyed Tom Cruise's marriage to Nicole
Okay.
Kidman.
Yeah. Right.
Um, and Nicole Kidman seemed very happy about it. So like, is there any other version of this, like, where like a film director, like literally, because he basically like Kubrick became their therapist for each of them, and he would like
Yeah.
separate them and be like, "Tell me your fantasies," and we'll
Yeah.
incorporate that into the movie. And like neither of them were allowed to talk to each other really outside of like what they had said to Kubrick,
Mm.
and like essentially he just like turned them against each other. And like Kubrick's kind of a bastard, like, but at the same time, like you got to think like sometimes I get the impression that actors are dumb because they let
Yeah.
this happen and they were just like, we'll submit ourselves to the master, and it's like, oh, fucking like, come on. Like
Yeah.
you kind of like, you know what, I'm not gonna say they were asking for it, but like there is a weird, I don't know, like it's just you're so devoted to something that it's like, oh yeah, time to just like destroy our lives for this movie. I mean, what a movie
Yeah.
to do it for, though, right? Like, I mean,
Yeah.
my God,
Worth it.
yeah, definitely worth it. Definitely worth your marriage, Mr. Cruz. But God, I mean, yeah, like what is like what is your take on this and like the space of their careers, right? Because Kidman is coming off of like stuff like Portrait of a Lady, and like where she's trying to like get these more dramatic roles, and like she really
Mm.
blossoms after this movie, right? She does the others, she does all these, like she
Like
becomes kind of more
Dogville.
of a respected, yeah, like
Yeah.
she becomes much more of a major figure. And then Cruise kind of enters his weird like Vanilla Sky,
Mm.
Spielberg, Collateral
Mhm.
era, and then that all ends with the couch jumping shit. So like, yeah, like where do you see this in terms of their whole oeuvre?
I think it's impossible to say, well, this is, I mean, it's just categorically untrue to think that this is just another role and that it had no impact. Like, clearly, the significance is like self evident because you have Tom Cruise sort of getting into more interesting areas with things like Interview with a Vampire and Magnolia around this sort of time. And then, although I think Magnolia was after he'd shot Eyes Wide Shut, so I can't be sure of the
Yes.
timelines. But like approaching that, and then like you say, Nicole Kidman, like after immediately after this, he sort of falls back on big action stuff like Mission Impossible 2 and Minority Report. So I think there was a kind of retreat going on with him after this. Like the toll must have been like strong
Well, he shot this
to
thing
have.
for like 3 fucking years.
Yeah, and then like the two of them being under super scrutiny for that, and obviously Kubrick basically has to kind of permeate every aspect of their relationship to understand them in order to understand their performance in this film. And clearly that was very constrictive for him, but very liberating for her because afterwards, like you say, she blossoms into this kind of like I don't know, like like probably some of her best work. Like The Others is really good. Her
Yeah, I
performance
mean,
in
she
Dogma is
becomes,
really good.
she gets Academy Awards and stuff. Like it's
Yeah,
like it
like Moulin Rouge is the exception that proves the rule because it's utter garbage. But like,
I
there
still need
was
to
there
see
was a
that shit.
strength.
I'll
Yeah,
tell you, from the
it's
vibe, from the buzz of it all, I might like that shit. If I do like
yeah.
it, you can't blame me. But anyway, go on.
Well, yeah, Baz is a whole other realm of auteur. But there is, I think, even in performances I don't like Moulin Rouge, there is a self possessiveness in them. Like I can do this kind of thing. So clearly, it was a turning point. Like it was just quite clearly that it broke one of them. It made him retreat, and I think it would have been liberating for her. Like I don't think it's a stretch of the imagination to say that the extent of the intimacy and vulnerability required for this film would have had something to do with them subsequently being either liberated or kind of constrained. I think it definitely plays
Yeah,
a part.
I think this is the proto like flip for Cruise, where
Yeah,
after this, I think it's like a soft turn, and then like his like from this to War of the World is basically his like intern period,
yeah,
intermittent period, and like yeah, it's like things just kind of shift rapidly after that, and
mm,
this is kind of really. I mean, I love Collateral, and I think his performance in that is great, but this is kind of the last
yeah,
time that I think he tries to go something like radically out of his comfort zone.
yeah, definitely, yeah.
um because
I, mm,
like it because he already did the kind of vampiric-esque villain thing in Interview with the Vampire, obviously, which I think carries some bits over into Collateral. And so I mean, like this is like very adventurous, and like same thing with Magnolia, right? This period, it's I mean, it's just a fascinating one for him. But
mm.
yeah, okay. So did you see what happened?
Well, she walks off like
Uh
the
huh.
last shot of her. She walks um away. But
Yeah.
very knowing. There was a very knowing kind of look. And there
Yes.
were the two dudes in front of her. I don't know if there's some kind of sinister.
So
I mean, clearly,
so what a friend of mine told me about was that basically her reading of that was that while these parents are essentially like confronting their nihilistic, just like who cares what anything is, like let's just fuck, like while they're engaging in that kind of bullshit, their daughter walks away with like these two guys, and like they like she gets carried away essentially by one of them.
ah, shit.
And it's the idea that like basically in the way that underage girl was like being abused and exploited, it's like this is the kind of attitude that fosters and creates these like lost women who end up
Yeah,
in, what I mean, like the like
yeah,
it's like this circular like thing. I don't know, maybe a bit much, but like every time I watch the ending now, I can't help but think of that, where like
yeah,
it's like they're it's like, oh yeah, oh yeah, kid, go and get your toys, and like they don't really give too much of a shit about her, and they're more
yeah.
obsessed with themselves and their own fantasies and all that. It's like, yeah, there's something to that, I think.
Well,
Which
I don't
yeah,
want to play like armchair psychologist, but I think and this might be a bit broad, but I'll put it out there anyways that there is an argument to be made that repressive home lives, especially very kind of waspy upper middle class, tend to foster the need for kind of more extroverted desires. They're like more promiscuous desires. Someone will be more open to exploring these things. Obviously in this context, but like you're saying, there is an interpretation to be made of like the link between parents who are like kind of very closed off about these things, or at least everything is discussed behind kind of closed doors and never really having a window into that world, if that makes sense.
yeah, yeah, definitely. Um, okay, all right.
One last point I want to make is,
That's
and
what I
it's
should.
it's a personal point, but this
Express
waltz
yourself.
is my favorite bit of Kubrick music use. It is like burrowed into my mind every time I hear like a bit of it, and it's yeah, I just think it's like my favorite bit of his music use in a filmography of like amazing music uses. I just am completely addicted to this waltz. Nothing significant about that at all. I just fucking love a good old waltz, you know. Of all his
Yeah, yeah.
waltzes, this is my favorite.
Well, he's the ultimate like guy who's just like, all right, I'm just gonna drop some classical music here and gonna flex. I
Yeah,
remember reading up on who this was, but I can't for the life of me think of it now.
the
Um,
music.
yeah, yeah. Uh,
I'm gonna butcher it. Shostakovich. I can't pronounce his name, but
Stostakovich.
pronounce it
Yeah.
Mexico.
Please yell at us in the comments for that
Yeah,
mispronunciation.
yeah. Apologies.
Um, so Tomo, where can people find you and what you're doing and what you're up to if you want them to do that sort of thing?
Um, I am out there on. I use Twitter very infrequently. I think I'm just Tom C. Oliver. If you want to see more of things I
Your
do in
incredible
making
takes.
specifically, incredible takes I limit to a bare minimum just because I fear what um, the reciprocal effect. But Instagram, I use this Tomolatov, TOMOLATOV, which I put a lot of film stuff on, things I film. I like making films, short films. I do the occasional music video. So if you want the complete opposite of Kubrickian obsess and precision, then that is the place to be. So yeah, that's where I'm at.
Alrighty then. There's one more thing I forgot. Oh, that's right, that's right. So Tomo,
Mhm.
before we do anything else,
Yeah.
there's one thing we gotta make sure to do.
I'm really scared about what you're gonna say.
We gotta make sure we fuck.